This page is the cover of N64 Magazine, issue 43, dated July 2000. Right in the middle you can't miss the massive headline, First Review, Zelda Majora's Mask hyped up as Link's greatest adventure yet. Rue. Of course, back then, any new Zelda was a massive event. Looking back, Majora's Mask was a bit different, darker, and certainly not your typical Zelda fare. There's a big yellow badge proclaiming Best Game Ever, and something about Reader Awards, which is a bit much even for a Zelda game before release, isn't it? Clearly they were excited. Down the right side are blurbs for other games. Smashing, Mario Tennis, stunning, Dinosaur Planet, and shocking, Conker's BFD. Mario Tennis on the N64 was a solid party game, always good for a laugh. Dinosaur Planet, that ended up becoming Star Fox Adventures on the GameCube, didn't it? Interesting to see it in its original form here. And Conker's Bad Fur Day, well that was definitely shocking for Nintendo at the time, with its sweary furry animals. Nintendo trying to be edgy, bless them. At the bottom there's a big Pikachu shouting plus, next to Planet Game Boy Pokemon Yellow. Pokemon Yellow on the Game Boy, that takes me back. The original and best Game Boy mag inside apparently, and a Bulbasaur lurking there. Teeting. Up top it mentions Perfect Dark, cool new stuff, and shows Joanna Dark, which was still a bit of a poster girl for the system back then. Overall typical N64 mag cover. Lots going on, bright colors, trying to grab your attention, and it worked back in the day, didn't it? This page is the welcome page to issue 43 of N64 Magazine. Right at the top, it proudly proclaims itself the UK's best-selling independent Nintendo mag. Andrea Ball is the editor, listed in the staff box on the side along with the deputy and art editors and all the production folks. She's basically saying, welcome to the mag, and gives the spiel about why it's the best. Apparently they get their news direct from their correspondents in Europe, Japan and America, so they reckon they're ahead of the curve with first-hand info, and not just copying rumors off the internet, which back then, pre-ubiquitous internet, was a proper selling point. They are also saying they review games as soon as they come out, even if it's in Japan or America first, so you know what's worth looking forward to. Honest reviews are promised, and if a game is awful, they'll say so. We shall see about that. It's all about the N64 games you can buy in the UK apparently, but they do big articles on the Japanese stuff too. Down the side there are teasers for what's inside this issue. Reader Awards are on page 28, where we find out the reader's favorite N64 game of all time. Always a bit of fun to see if your faves match up. Zelda Majora's Mask is on page 64, asking if it can be as good as Ocarina of Time. Massive question at the time, wasn't it? Pokemon Yellow on page 38, Pikachu's got his own game apparently and it's ace. Perfect Dark on page 52 with extra cool stuff. Dinosaur Planet on page 8, first shots of Rare's new RPG that was a big deal. Rare were the kings back then, and anything they did was hotly anticipated. Finally, Conker's Bad Fur Day on page 6, the X-rated squirrel shocker. They were really pushing the boat out with that one, weren't they? And then there's a little box at the bottom saying next issue is out on Friday, July 7th, and something amazing is on page 120. Intriguing stuff. This page is the contents page for issue 43 of the mag, dated July 2000. Right at the top you've got the big contents title, can't miss that. First up is Planet 64, kicking off on page 12. Looks like the news desk section is covering all the big announcements from E3, which was always a hype machine back then. Then there's a coming soon bit, page 18, promising a look at the latest games. They've got a box for Mickey Speedway USA on page 18, pitching it as Mickey and his pals doing Mario Kart Rare style. Bit cheeky to compare it to Mario Kart, but Rare were on fire back then, so maybe it was alright. Mickey's pals. Next is Eternal Darkness on page 20, saying Martin's played it and wants to tell you what he thinks. That was a weird one, a mature horror game on the N64, wasn't your usual Nintendo fare. And then Cat Roots on page 23, apparently the first exciting details on a brand new Nintendo game. Never actually heard of that one though. Oh, and Planet Game Boy is tucked in there too, page 35. Talking about Pikachu starring in a special edition Pokemon game, wondering if it's better than Red or Blue. Always banging on about Pokemon back then, weren't they? Mentions Pikachu's beach and surfing with a control pad. Sounds like a minigame. Moving over to the right side, we've got N64 Arena, starting on page 56. That's where they review all the UK releases, give ratings and all that. Excitebike 64 inches is on page 58, calling it Nintendo's new racer, and saying it's top of the biking pile. Excitebike was always a classic, so that's probably worth a look. Then, Taz Express on page 62, and they're already being a bit sarcastic, saying Taz whirls onto the N64, but they wish he hadn't bothered. Ouch, maybe that one wasn't so good then. Import Arena is on page 64 for all the Japanese and American games, and right below that, the big one, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, also starting on page 64. Big question is whether it can live up to Ocarina of Time. Everyone was wondering that at the time, Ocarina was a tough act to follow. Down at the bottom is the Regulars section. Information Station, on page 26, for fixing up your N64 and release lists. N64 Secrets, on page 120, probably cheat codes and stuff. And N64 Inches on page 122, with Gru Wrestling 64 and shocking details revealed. Always had some wrestling game coverage in these mags. And right at the bottom in the corner, page number 4 and issue 43 again. That's the contents page then, sets out what's inside the mag for that month. This page is the contents page for the magazine, right at the front there. It's teasing all the big articles inside. N64 Future Look kicks things off on page 6, promising a first glimpse at upcoming N64 games. Always good to see what's on the horizon. Then there's Conker's Bad Fur Day. They're saying prepare to be shocked, and Conker's gone X-rated. Bit cheeky for an N64 game, wasn't it? Page 8 for that one. Next up is Dinosaur Planet. First shots of Rare's epic new fantasy RPG, on page 8 as well. Rare were on a roll back then, weren't they? And Mario Tennis. Mario and pals popping up on Centra Court. Page 10 Standard Mario Sports Fair, always a laugh with mates. Moving down there's N64 Club 64, the ultimate reader service, starts on page 73. Then, How to Trash the Monsters at Pokemon Stadium, and Take Home the Gold in Track and Field 2000, pages 78 and 84 respectively. Pokemon Stadium, everyone was still mad for Pokemon back then. Track and Field 2000, bit of button bashing fun for the Olympics hype. Club 64 Mailbox, on page 74. Moans, mess-ups and masks on money. Sounds like the usual reader letters page. Tips Extra, on page 88. The hottest tips for the very latest N64 games. Always needed those cheat codes and secrets. DR Kit's Game Clinic, on page 93. The Doctor cures your gaming misery. Remember Dr. Kits, he was alright. Game On, page 94. 8 new challenges supplied by you. Are you good enough? I'm the best, page 96. Latest listings and new prize winners. Skill Club 2000, on page 100. The leagues are getting fuller. That Skill Club thing was a bit of a fad, wasn't it? Directory, on page 104. Your first point of call before you buy. Probably game shops and stuff. Back issues and subscriptions, on page 114. Order a missing issue, or get the mag delivered to your door. Finally, at the bottom right, 2000 Reader Awards, on page 28. You voted in your thousands, now find out who the winners are. Always a bit of fun to see what won. Then Perfect Game, on page 52, we plunge into the hidden depths of PD and uncover even more cool details. Perfect Dark, absolute classic, everyone loved that game. And lastly, Go Gadget, on page 116. Will GoldenEye's watch magnet ever be yours? GoldenEye, another classic, and the watch magnet was iconic. So yeah, that's the contents page, sets you up for what's inside. This page is all about a future look at the big new N64 games coming out. Right at the top in big letters it says look, so you can't miss it. They're teasing what's coming up this month in issue 43. The main game they are banging on about is Conker's Bad Fur Day. Apparently it's Rare's rodent-based swearathon exposed, which sounds a bit dodgy, doesn't it? They gave it a score of 6, which isn't amazing, but it's early days, I suppose. There are a few screenshots, one of Conker looking proper greedy with $signs in his eyes, and another where he seems to have a gun, but they're saying it's not a flamethrower cheeky. And then there's another picture of Conker looking a bit hard in a military helmet, with a cigar and a speech bubble full of swear words. Charming! They're saying even with the bad language and toilet humor, the graphics are good, which is typical Rare, always making things look nice. Then there's Dinosaur Planet, which they're calling Rare's new Zelda beta. Bit ambitious, isn't it? They've given that an 8, so they must be thinking it's alright. It's just a first shots preview, so not much to go on yet. A 2. Lastly, they mention Mario Tennis, calling it Nintendo's new tennis smash. It got a score of 10, so they are clearly well impressed with that one. Looks like Nintendo are on to another winner with Mario sports games. They always seem to do alright with those. Warrington. There's also an info burst box for Conker, with all the usual techie stuff like cart size, number of players and what packs it uses. Apparently it's out in December in the US and UK, and TBA for Japan. They've given it a full 5 red dots for anticipation rating, so someone's excited even if the score wasn't sky high. If you want more on new games, they are plugging the coming soon section on page 18 of Planet 64, whatever that is. Sounds like there's more to come in the magazine. This page is all about Conker's Bad Fur Day finally. Remember Conker's Quest at E3 Feet 97? It was supposed to come out ages ago, then got canned and replaced by 12 Tales, Conker 64, which also went nowhere. Honestly, everyone thought Conker was just going to be stuck on the Game Boy, ages ago. But here he is, back as a squirrel, but a seriously drunk one apparently. They're calling it Conker's Bad Fur Day and saying it's nothing like Nintendo's ever done before. Bit of a departure from the usual Mario and Zelda then. They're saying it's like South Park but funny, which is a bold claim. For each. Looks like you make a deal with the Grim Reaper right at the start, which gives you infinite lives. Good job, because from the sounds of it, Conker's getting up to all sorts of mischief. They're saying it's a 15 certificate game, which is pretty rare for the N64. Drinking, swearing and being sadistic, that sounds about right for a boozed up squirrel. There's talk of ass-kicking contests with talking pitchforks, a beach landing parody, and a fight with a dinosaur and caveman. You even have to, nip the caveman in the groin. Right then. And there's something about a scouse dung beetle with voice acting, blimey. The screenshots show the Grim Reaper, a dinosaur which is apparently a caveman ass, and some wasps that are called six-legged assassins. There's also a picture of Conker, being chased by something huge and fat, and a level with psychedelic lighting. Sounds like they're really pushing the boat out with this one. Jassy. They're saying the original Conker's Quest platforming is still there, but with added automatic weapons, and the puzzles are apparently like Banjo-Kazooie, but with potty-mouthed cutscenes. Charming. It's due out in December, assuming it doesn't get delayed again, which wouldn't surprise anyone at this point. Expect more bizarre details over the coming months, it says, so I suppose we'll have to wait and see what other madness they come up with. This page is all about Dinosaur Planet, Rare's new action RPG that was getting a lot of buzz back then as potentially being a proper Zelda beater. It was played at E3, and they've got a little Mario sticker to show that classic E3 hype. Gendra. The article goes on about how everything is looking top-notch, and it could be the best RPG on the N64 by the end of the year. The game's set on Dinosaur Planet, starring Sabre and his furry chums who are menaced by reptile-like creatures. Sounds a bit odd really, but hey, it's Rare. They mention the story details are being kept quiet, typical for E3 demos, but there's a handy menu for warping between scenes to show off different environments. The reviewer reckons it gave a good impression of what to expect from the game, and it borrows elements from Zelda, like context-sensitive actions. In the info burst box we've got the details. It's from Rare, of course. A hefty 512 megabit cart size, so it's going to be a big game. Single player only, which is fine for an RPG. No controller pack, expansion pack is a yes, rumble pack is a yes, and no transfer pack needed. Release dates are down as December in the US and UK, and TBA for Japan. The anticipation rating is 5 orange circles out of 5, so they are clearly quite impressed. 10A. There's a bit about the controls, trigger lock-on, Z trigger for context actions, triangle hovering over interactable objects, standard stuff really, and they mention sending sidekicks on errands. They also talk about visual aspects, saying the colors sparkle, and the sunsets are impressive. Apparently you meet around 50 creatures, some of which can be sidekicks. In the demo they played, you controlled a baby dinosaur and could whistle to get a response. They describe a scene where Crystal, a female Animus native, is fleeing a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Then there was a boss fight against a giant bug where Sabre had to attack its belly, and a jet bike race was also shown. Sounds like they were throwing everything but the kitchen sink at this game to impress. Looking back, it did look gorgeous for the time. This page in N64 Magazine, right? It's doing a future look bit on Dinosaur Planet, remember that? Blimey, that was a looker, even back then. They're saying the waterfalls look a bit like Jet Force Gemini, which you can see. Rare does love its water effects, doesn't it? And they're banging on about these massive outdoor areas, miles and miles they reckon. Big claim. Worse. There's a shot of Sabre, that's the main fox fella, chatting to his dinosaur mate, and they're calling it cute, which, yeah I suppose it is. Another screenshot shows this autumn scene on Animus. Looks a bit moody, doesn't it? And then they're showing off the combat, enemies have health bars and all that fairly standard stuff, but visually it's shaping up nicely. They're making a big deal about the voice acting, saying every line is spoken and the characters' faces actually move with the words, which was a pretty big deal on the N64. Apparently, there are bonus bits hidden in the lakes and puzzles, and this rock monster bloke and a spooky galleon are in the intro movie. Sounds like classic Rare adventure stuff, puzzles, and exploring. Intro movie. They reckon it's a massive 512 megabit cart. That's a big old cartridge, isn't it? They are saying it was meant to be out by Christmas 2000, based on how far along it was at E3. Always optimistic, aren't they? Right at the bottom it says to be continued, and that they'll have more info in the coming months. Keeping us hanging on, weren't they? July 2000, that was a time. This page is a preview of Mario Tennis for the N64. Right then, so it's another Mario sports title from Camelot, those guys who did Mario Golf, and they're saying it's like Super Tennis on the SNES but brought bang up to date for the N64. Apparently the controls are simple. Just 2 buttons and the stick, but there's loads of depth. You've got your basic shots, and charge shots, and even super shots if you hold the button long enough. Sounds like fun. They mention the usual Nintendo suspects are in there. Mario, Luigi, Peach, Donkey Kong, Bowser, Wario, and a new bad guy called Waluigi, who's described as an evil dick dastardly version of Luigi. Cheeky. They're teasing hidden characters too, hinting at Pokemon, which knowing Nintendo back then, was almost guaranteed. Apparently each character plays differently. Bowser's a bit rubbish at acrobatics apparently. Game modes wise, there's your standard tennis, and a ring shot mode where you hit the ball through rings, and the points get bigger. Sounds a bit different, could be a laugh in multiplayer. They also reckon there might be some kind of RPG or training mode where you can upload characters from a Game Boy version using the transfer pack, like in Mario Golf, which is a neat idea. Why? There are screenshots showing Mario and Luigi in a match, and another with Peach smashing a shot against Wario. Down at the bottom there's an info burst with the key details. It's coming on a 128 megabit cart, which was pretty standard size back then, 1 to 4 players, no controller or expansion pack needed, but Rumble and Transfer Pack NACA supported, sensible choices. Release dates are listed as September for the US, July in Japan, and TBA for the UK, typical. They're giving it a full 5 red blobs for anticipation, so they're clearly pretty hyped for it, and to be fair it does look pretty good. They're hoping it'll be in the UK before the end of the year, and judging by the looks of it, it seems pretty polished already. This page is all about Mario Tennis for the N64. Blimey, what a game that was. It's got screenshots galore showing off the 4-player action, which was a proper laugh with mates back in the day. They're highlighting the gameplay with bits like, 4-player action is what Mario Tennis is all about. Yeah, tell me something I don't know. There's also a bit about Kong and his pyrotechnic display special shots, typical Donkey Kong, always showing off. And Waluigi's there too, described as the unacceptable face of Mario Tennis. Cheeky. But he is a bit of a weirdo, isn't he? They mention replays after every point, which was pretty cool at the time, and talk about Wario being weighty. There's even a little nod to baby Mario being in the game, and Toad being a tennis demon. Blimey. Oh, and it says played at E3 Games Expo, so it's clearly previewing the game before release, probably around July 2000 going by the date at the bottom. They're proper raving about it, calling it a love game, very enthusiastic. Good times, Mario Tennis was brilliant. This page of Planet 64 News Desk is all about Nintendo's plans from E3. Back in the day, the big headline is, Nintendo committed to N64 and Game Boy, which was a bit of a statement at the time, considering everyone was buzzing about the next generation consoles. The article talks about how E3 in Los Angeles is the biggest game show, and usually everyone shows off their new stuff. But Nintendo decided to take a bit of a backseat this year because Sony were pushing the PlayStation 2, and Microsoft was showing off the Xbox, on video at least. Agaba. Minoru Arakawa, who was head of Nintendo of America back then, held a press conference explaining they were keeping both Dolphin, which we now know was the GameCube, and the Game Boy Advance under wraps. Apparently, they had Dolphin games ready to go, but because of processor issues and graphics chip manufacturing delays, they decided to hold back. They were also still working on the Game Boy Advance, getting developers up to speed for its launch. Import gamers were going to be able to get the Japanese version in November, but the rest of us had to wait a bit longer. The reason for the delay apparently was that Nintendo didn't feel the need to rush, as the N64 and Game Boy Color were still selling well. Arakawa even predicted that Pokemon Gold and Silver would be massive, selling millions. He wasn't wrong there, were they absolute bangers. Apparently Nintendo had a 48% market share at the time, which is pretty dominant. Even then, the article also mentions that even though next-gen stuff was coming, Nintendo was sticking with the N64 as it made good business sense, and Arakawa is quoted as saying, "This is a harvest time, let's make some money." Bit blunt, but fair enough. They were promising loads of third-party N64 games too, like 68 to 70 of them, which was meant to be the strongest lineup in the company's history. There's a picture of Joanna Dark from Perfect Dark seemingly making Arakawa blush, and a picture of Pikachu in a fountain at E3, looking a bit lost in all the chaos. Yeah, E3 was always a madhouse. This page covers the E3 show in LA, or rather, what Nintendo was showing off there. Seems like it was quite a spectacle if you were lucky enough to go. They were really pushing Pokemon Gold and Silver at the show, which to be fair were massive at the time. Everyone was gagging for those. They also had English versions of the new Pokemon games playable, plus were giving away freebies, drawing in the crowds for sure. The most talked about thing though apparently, was the Conker's Bad Fur Day bar. Imagine that, a darkened tent with loads of machines to play Conker on, and free beer. No wonder all the exhibitors from other stands were flocking there for a pint. It mentions people were queuing up for a sip of Conkers. Sounds a bit dodgy, doesn't it? It was definitely the game everyone was talking about, even though they were saying it would be a whopping $89.95 in the US, which is daylight robbery, even for back then. They also mention Hey You Pikachu being shown in English, and apparently, it got a decent 91% score from their testing team. Personally, talking to a virtual Pikachu always felt a bit daft, but hey, maybe it was therapeutic, who knows? There's a bit about third-party games, mentioning Turok 3 and Resident Evil 0 as looking alright on the N64. They also list a bunch of other upcoming games that sound a bit less exciting, like Batman Beyond and some Army Men games. Doesn't sound like they were setting the world on fire though. They are expecting more news at Space World in August. In the Pokemon bit they talk about the Pokemon theme song singer trying to sue Nintendo, which is a bit of a laugh. Then there's something about Pokemon cheese snacks and cards, and Pokemon cereal, which is peak Pokemon craze, isn't it? Poke Fortified, they're calling it. Lastly, there's a tech section called Dolphin Speak, all about the new RAM in the Dolphin, which we now know is the GameCube. It's talking about 1T, SRAM, and how it's supposed to be faster and use less power. They're guessing the Dolphin will have 64 megabytes of RAM, which at the time sounded like loads. As me. As me. As me. One of Ash and Pikachu, naturally, a box of Kellogg's Pokemon cereal, a bloke holding a Conker's Bad Fur Day game box, and a picture of an N64 controller with a tiny microchip on someone's finger, presumably showing off this new RAM tech. Standard magazine page fare, really for the time. This page features a big headline: Nintendo Speaks. However, seems like the big wigs at Nintendo are chatting away from the E3 show floor. There's a piece called Head Honchos Speak from E3 floor, and it's all about what Nintendo was saying about their future plans back then. Apparently, they unveiled their next generation console, the Dolphin, which we now know as the GameCube, at Space World in August, along with a strong lineup of games for They were even talking about a Dolphin version of Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as some people call it. Peter Main from Nintendo of America is quoted saying it's more than just fast processors, it's about making games people actually want to play. They were hinting at more Dolphin games coming from Nintendo and third-party developers like Rare, Factor 5 and Left Field, and even Miyamoto's involvement. They touched on Lilac Wars again, with Miyamoto saying they felt they'd done all they could with the N64 version, so a sequel wasn't on the cards until the Dolphin came out. There's also a bit about Pokemon names in Sweden and Germany, Pokeswede and Pokedeuce, just little snippets about how they translate the names. Bulbasaur becomes Bulbasaram in German, for example, which, yeah, makes perfect sense. And a little arrow pointing to shortcuts on page 16. Then there's a how-to guide on sticking an exclusive N64 Perfect Dark console sticker on your console. It's a step-by-step guide with pictures, showing how to apply the sticker without getting bubbles. Seems a bit obvious really, but I suppose some people needed hand-holding back then. They even joked that if you mess it up and cover the Nintendo logo, Shigzy, meaning Miyamoto, will duff you up. Bit dramatic innit? They reckon by step 4 you are on the home straight, and by step 6 it's done. And they even say you should show it proudly, and people will be dead jealous. Bit much for a sticker, even if it is Perfect Dark themed. This page is looking at some new bits and bobs for gamers. First up, there's this Radica Parasites game, which is a right odd contraption. You strap this eerie looking eyeball thing to your face, and it's supposed to be a starship shooting game. You move your ship by twisting the eyeball and fire with buttons. They reckon it's not that comfy and the buttons are a bit weird, but say it's original, and the game is alright, and call it virtual reality. Cheeky! Worrying. Then there's some Pokemon sweet stuff. The Pokemon Pop Topper is basically a lolly stick trapped in a Pokemon's belly. You crack it open for the sugary goodness inside, a bit like those old Star Wars ones with Darth Vader heads. They've got Squirtle and Pikachu versions. Just a lolly really. Nothing too exciting. Chewy. And then, chewy. Next we've got the Pokemon Spin Pop Candy. This one's got Pikachu on a stand with a lolly sticking out. You press a red button to spin the lolly, They reckon it spins too quick to see properly. The lolly stick comes off, and you're left with a noisy Pikachu. Apparently it's well built and looks alright, but they say Pikachu looks a bit shocked. Moving on, there's the Pokemon Jawbreaker Taker. This is a Pokeball that opens up to reveal a Jawbreaker suite inside. You spin a dial to get the Jawbreaker out. Seems solidly built, though it's got one of those cheap keyring bits. They say it's sweet, but the Jawbreaker will be gone in a few months. It also comes with Pokemon stickers, like Haunter, Seal and Horsey, which is nice I suppose for kids. Many bay. Next up is the Wave LCD handheld game. They're saying it's marginally worse than some of the rubbish N64 games, which is a bit harsh, but LCD games, eh? It's a wrestling game. They compare it to a bad Kane, who was pretty bad back then in wrestling games on the 64 to be fair. Apparently there's no proper animation, you just move and hit. It's got an uppercut button. They reckon LCD games have been better since 1982, and this one's awful. Bit blunt, but fair enough for a cheapy handheld. Gonna yulpy. Lastly, there's the Game Boy bath game. It's a shower gel thing shaped like a Game Boy Classic, in yellow or silver. They say it's heavy. It's filled with shower gel, and has rubbery buttons on the front to move balls inside. Mario and Ash are on the background image. Apparently it smells a bit like talcum powder. They reckon if you take it on the tube in London you'll get some funny looks. Probably right. Who'd be playing with shower gel on the tube? At the bottom there's a competition to win a whole load of sugar. The question is, which of these ingredients do most sweets have in common? The options are A. Red pepper, B. Sugar, C. Dog. Well, it's got to be B. Sugar, unless you're eating some seriously weird sweets. The next page in the magazine, titled RETROWORLD, is all about retro gaming, which, even back then in the year 2000, was becoming a thing, wasn't it? At the top, there's a bit about Pokemon. Pokefortified 2 is about Pokemon Pop-Tarts, a limited edition tie-in with Kellogg's, boasting a new wild cherry flavor. They're saying breakfast is when we're most susceptible to marketing, which is probably right, especially when it comes to kids and Pokemon. Next to that is Poker Wrestling, announcing the Pokemon Stadium Championships 2000, coming to Gamey and Electronics Boutique. They even have a website to register, pokemonstadium.co.uk. Seems like Pokemon was absolutely everywhere back then, even breakfast and Burger King. Here, the main article is about N64's Time Machine being open for business, focusing on retro games. The main screenshot is for Tetris Attack on the SNES, which is described as influencing Pokemon Puzzle League. They are saying Nintendo were borrowing ideas from others back then, which is a bit cheeky, but Tetris Attack was brilliant, a really well-made puzzle game. They compare it to Yoshi's Cookie and Dr. Mario, saying Tetris Attack is more enjoyable and Nintendo are using it as the backbone for Pokemon Puzzle League. They simply can't wait for Pokemon Puzzle League. Which is fair enough, it was a good game. Below that is a section about Trans Am, from Ultimate Play the game in 1984. They list Diddy Kong Racing, Mickey's Adventure Racing, and Donkey Kong 64's racing sub-games as examples of Rare being good at speed-based thrills on the N64. They say Trans Am is from the Twycross coders, which is Stamper Brothers, doing the same thing for the Spectrum as they did for the N64. Apparently it's set in the year 3472, a Mad Max-esque future, and the perfect place to take your red racer out. They mention the quest to collect 8 randomly placed ultimate cups, avoiding obstacles, and calling it laughably simplistic. They also mention incredible multi-directional movement, which they say is screened typically over the top in the manual. They talk about the desert, cactus and yellow sand. They say Trans Am on the NES, Diddy Kong on the N64, is a quality slice of retro gaming. There are screenshots of Tetris Attack and Trans Am dotted around the text to illustrate the games. Looks like a good retro gaming feature, reminding us where some of the N64's ideas came from, and just how far back retro can go. This page is all about Mickey's Speedway USA. Blimey, who'd have thought Mickey Mouse on the N64? It's from E3, so this is a first look type thing. The reviewer reckons it's a bit like Diddy Kong Racing, but without the hovercrafts and planes, just go-karts. They mention it's similar to the original Super Mario Kart on the SNES, which is a fair point, but let's be honest, everything karting was compared to Mario Kart back then. Visually, they say the characters are instantly recognizable, and the backgrounds look like where you'd expect to find talking mice and half-human dogs. Smooth frame rate too, apparently. There's a little info burst box that tells you it's from Rare, 256 megabits kart, 1 to 4 players, Rumble Pack is a yes, Transfer Pack and Controller Pack are a no. Coming out in December for the UK and US, Japan TBA. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 red blobs, so they are quite keen then. The article itself talks about Mickey and Pluto being kidnapped by weasels, standard Disney fare. You play as Mickey, Minnie, Donald, Goofy and the gang in turbocharged buggies. They reckon it's produced by the same company as Diddy Kong Racing, Rare, which is a plus in my book. It's got tight hop-turn slide moves to increase your speed and boost chevrons. 5 Grand Prix circuits with 4 courses each. The first 3 are available from the start, and the 4th is unlocked later. They also mention American-themed tracks based on Yellowstone Park, Grand Canyon, and New York, Florida too. Authentic Disney look and commentary from the characters themselves is mentioned as a plus. They didn't find the hidden turbo start in the E3 version. Sounds alright for a kart racer, I suppose. We were all a bit karting gained out by this point on the N64, but Rare doing it might make it worth a look. This page features 2 games, Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, and Bomberman 64, The Second Attack. Indiana Jones is getting a new N64 game, and they're calling it a whip-cracking Tomb Raider. Bit cheeky that, comparing it to Lara Croft. Apparently Indy is dangling from ledges and shooting Soviets to stop them from using this infernal machine. Sounds a bit far-fetched, even for Indy. They mention Jeep races and whitewater rafting, so it's not just tomb raiding. The graphics look alright, super crisp according to the reviewer, and they say it's a PC conversion. It's got analog movement and Z targeting, so that's good to hear. They are saying it's better than the PC version, which is a bold claim. Autumn release date is mentioned, so still a bit of a wait. Warrington Nulsa. Then there's Bomberman 64, The Second Attack. After the last couple of Bomberman efforts on the N64, which were frankly a bit rubbish, they're saying this one is closer to the SNES style, so that's promising. Linear 3D platform levels apparently. They are saying it's not a massive leap forward, but still the best of the bunch on the N64 so far. They mention new types of bombs, a Pommy character, and a 2-player coupe mode, as well as a 4-player arena mode. That arena mode sounds like it might be alright. They say the multiplayer in the first N64 Bomberman was a letdown, so hopefully they've fixed that. Summer release for this one, so not too long to wait. This page is showcasing a couple of interesting titles from E3. First up we have Battle for Naboo. Right, so it's another Star Wars game, this time from Factor 5, the chaps behind Rogue Squadron, and apparently using the same engine. They're promising better graphics and less fogging, which is always a bonus. Less of that N64 fog we all loved. Looks like you'll be piloting different vehicles, N1 Starfighter, gunboat, the lot, and engaging in all sorts of combat, ground to air, air to ground, the works. It's out in October for the Yanks, and November for us, so not too long to wait. Then we have Eternal Darkness, which looks a bit different. Silicon Knights, who did Blood Omen, Legacy of Kain on the PlayStation, are making this one exclusively for Nintendo. They reckon it's going to be a top quality game. Sounds like a horror game spanning 2,000 years with 13 characters. They're banging on about a sanity meter, which sounds intriguing, and the camera angles are like Resident Evil, apparently switching at set points. Bit clunky perhaps. They say it's not a pick-a-pan-play game, which could be a good thing, or just means it's a bit awkward to control. We'll see. US release for Halloween, October 31st, but no date for us Brits yet, just TBA. Definitely one to keep an eye on. Looks a bit darker, and more grown-up than your average N64 fare. This page, right then, looks like we've got a double-header of game previews here, Turok 3 and Mega Man 64. Turok 3 seems to be getting a good write-up. They reckon it's come on leaps and bounds since they last saw it. Apparently the graphics are smooth even in hires, and the aiming's spot on. Multiplayer sounds decent with loads of arenas, some nicked from the older Turok games it seems. Cutscenes are getting a mention too, detailed faces and all that. Infoburst tells us it's from Acclaim, chunky cart size, 1 to 4 players, supports all the packs, and out in October. Then we've got Mega Man 64. Sounds like they weren't blown away by this one, to be honest. Sandwiched between Resident Evil demos, not a great start, is it? They're saying it looks a bit PlayStation-y, graphics are simple, but it's still fun and easy to play. Servbots are called Q enemies, which is a bit daft. Infoburst says Capcom are behind it, smaller cart size than Turok, single player, pack supported, and it's out in September here, July in Japan. So Turok 3 sounds like the one to watch. Mega Man 64 maybe a bit less so, but we'll see. This page features a couple of game previews, both played at E3. First up, we've got Paper Mario, or as it was known in Japan, Mario Story. It's billed as a sequel to Super Mario RPG on the SNES, which was a proper gem back in the day. They're really pushing the paper style, saying everything looks like animated paper, which is certainly a unique visual direction for a Mario game. The Infoburst box tells us it's coming from Nintendo and is a 128 megabit cart, single player, and needs a controller pack for saves. but no rumble or expansion pack needed. That's good to know. They're saying December for Japan, but only TBA Meg for the UK. And they even seem a bit skeptical about the US release date being December. Haha, fair enough. Those release dates were always a bit fluid. They talk about the combat being turn-based, a bit like Pokemon, and show screenshots of Mario battling a paper boss, and even Luigi getting in on the action. They mention collecting items to improve stats, so it sounds like a proper RPG-like sort of thing in the Mario universe. Then below that we have Donald Duck, Going Quackers. This is supposed to be Donald's first 3D platformer. And they're making a point of saying it uses the Rayman 2 engine, which is a pretty solid engine. Rayman 2 looked fantastic. Apparently Scrooge McDuck is a playable character in this version, which is interesting. They mentioned Donald having a psycho mode when he gets annoyed. Sounds a bit bonkers, turning into a swirling cloud of limbs apparently. The info box says it's from Ubisoft, single player, and Rumble Pack compatible, but no controller or expansion pack needed. They're saying autumn for release, which is typical for a Christmas rush title. The screenshots show some fairly standard 3D platforming levels, though they do mention unusual camera angles and tricky platforms, and the reviewer finishes by saying Donald might be a winner, which is maybe a bit hopeful. We'll see about that one. This page is all about a bizarre game called Cat Roots. Apparently it was a surprise showing at E3, tucked away on the Nintendo stand. It's got this very strange video of a female opera singer cat getting whacked by a mallet-wielding clown, then a purple cat strolling an alley who gets roughed up by a mouse with shurikens and a flamethrower. Sounds proper bonkers, doesn't it? The reviewer even jokes it might be a dolphin game in disguise. They reckon it's a platform game, but who knows really. Graphics are described as gorgeous and the humor as sick. Imagine Itchy and Scratchy in 3D, which is a fair shout actually. Then there's an info burst box with details like cart size, TBA, how many players, TBA, all very mysterious. It says Rumble Pack is yes, which is a must back then. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 blobs, so someone's excited about it, even if it sounds utterly mental. Boah. Over on the right, it's a sales page from Wickedware. They're flogging second-hand N64 consoles for £34.99, which is alright. They've got a deal on for a special edition Pokemon N64, and Perfect Dark is only £41.99. Pokemon Yellow is pushed hard, both the cartridge and the Game Boy Color bundle. They are really pushing Pokemon Snap as well, asking you to call for details. There's loads of games listed for sale, sections for UK Games N64, and UK Games Game Boy. Looking at the N64 list, it's your usual suspects, loads of racing games, shooters and platformers. GoldenEye, Mario 64, Zelda Ocarina of Time, all the classics. They've got stuff like Carmageddon 64 and Daikatana listed too. Some games were better than others, let's be honest. Game Boy section is similar, Pokemon games, Zelda Link's Awakening, the usual handheld fodder. Below that, it's Game Boy Color accessories and N64 wheels, rumble packs and cables. Typical shop page stuff really. Soft character toys are advertised, Nintendo beanies, buy 3 get Bowser free. Always trying to flog you something extra. Pokemon trading cards are also mentioned, booster packs, starter packs, all that business. Pokemon Pikachu is only £17.99, must be the game. Crane. Overall, a pretty standard games magazine page from back in the day, bit of a game preview and a sales catalogue all rolled into one. Cat Roots sounds like a laugh, even if it's completely off the wall. This page is from N64 Magazine's E3 special. Looks like they've gone to the show and checked out a couple of upcoming games. First up there's San Francisco Rush 2049, the third in the Rush series from Midway. Apparently Stunt Racer 64 got canned, so this is their big stunt racer for the N64 now. It's promising barrel rolls and car thrashing action, and they reckon it's going to be a treat. Specs-wise, it's a 128 megabit cart, 1 or 2 players, and uses the controller and rumble pucks, and even the expansion puck, but no transfer puck. They're saying it's out in September or October. They're calling it the third time around the track for Midway's stunt racing, and it seems like they've built the courses from scratch, and there's even more secret routes. Looks like there are 10 tracks, and 4 stunt tracks, and you can even race them in reverse or mirrored mode, so that's loads of tracks in total. The screenshots show some sharp-looking graphics, and they're happy to see there's less fog than the old Rush games. They mention muscle cars are back, and the handling is still that floaty Rush style, which you either love or hate. Tuva, tu, tuva, tu, tuva, tuva, tu, tuva, tu, 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 tuva, tuva, tu, tu, tuva, tu, tuva, tuva, tuva. Right then, so this is the mysterious Pokemon Attack game, which is basically Tetris Attack, with a Pokemon skin. Specs are 128 megabit again, 1 or 2 players, Rumble Pack only, and it's due out in September or November. They're saying, gotta match 'em all, as if we haven't heard that before. They recognize it's Tetris Attack straight away. Which is fair enough, everyone knows Tetris Attack, it was brilliant on the SNES and Game Boy. They're saying the controls are spot on and the 3D cylindrical play area isn't too confusing. Apparently choosing your Pokemon at the start affects your playing style. They reckon it's frantic and addictive, which sounds about right for Tetris Attack. They're a bit disappointed that the Pokemon connection is just Pikachu and some other monsters in the background, but they still think it'll be good when it comes out in November. Seems alright for a bit of puzzle action if you're into Pokemon, I suppose. This page in N64 Magazine is taking a look at a couple of new games on the horizon, classic arcade action, and some cartoon capers. First up, it's Midway's Arcade Hits. They're bringing a collection of proper old-school arcade games to the N64. Things like Spy Hunter, Tapper where you're the harassed bartender, Juiced with the lance-wielding birds, Defender, Robotron 2084 and Sinistar. They reckon this is for us older gamers, who remember pumping coins into these machines back in the day. Apparently they've emulated them perfectly on the N64, which is what you'd hope, isn't it? They even mention Sinistar was recently resurrected on the Dreamcast, but the original arcade experience is what they are going for here. The page has one of those info burst boxes with all the details, cartridge size, number of players, Rumble Pack support and release dates, looking at November or December time. Then there's Scooby-Doo. Blimey, Scooby-Doo on the N64, who'd have thought it? Apparently, it's based on the original 70s cartoons, not any of that later spin-off rubbish. It's got all the classic characters, Scooby, Shaggy, Daphne, the whole gang, and of course, the Mystery Machine van. You play as Shaggy, which makes sense as he's always getting into a pickle, and the others help out. Sounds like it's got all the classic Scooby locations, haunted museums, gothic mansions, and even a ghost-ridden ski lodge, that sort of thing. They do mention the camera angles being a bit confusing, which might be a problem. And apparently, some American bloke thought it looked like a Game Boy game, which is a bit strong. They're even saying it's like Resident Evil for younger players, which is a bit of a stretch if you ask me. Again, there's an info burst box with all the game details, 96 megabit cartridge, up to 4 players, Rumble Pack support, and it's coming out in the autumn. Seems like they're really leaning into the retro nostalgia thing with this one as well. This page announces the results of the Millennium Readers Awards for N64 Magazine. They reckoned they were swamped with over 1,000 voting forms, which sounds about right. We were all keen to have our say back then. It was a double celebration apparently, for N64 greatness, and they asked us to vote for the best game of the last 12 months, and the best N64 game of all time. Sounds like they got a massive response, calling it the most representative opinion of N64 readers worldwide to date. Bit dramatic, but it was the millennium, wasn't it? They've split the results in half for convenience, and the best 5 games are on the next pages. There's a picture of some folks in suits, looking all pleased with themselves, like they're at some fancy awards do, and a bottle of bubbly is in shot too. Bit of a laugh. This page is all about the 2000 Readers Awards for the N64. Looks like a bit of a posh do, judging by the blokes in tuxedos sat around a fancy dinner table, all clapping. Mario's there too, perched on some kind of golden coin award thing, holding a letter. It explains how these awards worked. Apparently hundreds of us gamers filled in forms voting for our favorite N64 games from the last year or so. They got over 1,000 votes in total, for loads of different games. The voting system sounds a bit complicated, but basically, your top game got more points and so on. They've totted it all up, and are about to reveal the results of the best N64 games of the year, and of all time apparently. They're teasing a surprise or two as well. So yeah, it's the big reveal of what us N64 owners thought were the top dogs back then. Let's see what made the cut, shall we? Turn over for the awards, they say. Classic magazine cliffhanger. This page showcases the results of the 2000 Reader Awards in N64 Magazine for Game of the Year. It seems like they've counted down from 5th place upwards, which is a bit of an odd way to do it, innit? Starting at number 5, we've got WWF WrestleMania 2000. THQ published it, and apparently it got 1075 points and a solid 90% review score in the mag. They reckon it was a step up from Acclaim's wrestling games, and praised the grappling system and the roster, highlighting Undertaker and Stone Cold Steve Austin, proper lads. Number 4 is Shadow Man, from Acclaim, scoring 1115 points and a 93% review. They were banging on about the hand-to-hand combat and voodoo vibes, saying it was a close call between this and WrestleMania 2000. Apparently they followed its development in the magazine, which must have been exciting for readers at the time. They reckoned it was a more mature game, which is probably why it appealed to some over all the cartoon stuff. In 3rd place, It's Super Smash Bros. From Nintendo, 1747 points, and another 90% review. They make a point of saying readers campaigned to bring it to the UK, which is a laugh, we all wanted it anyway. They call it Nintendo's cutest fighter, and talk about Mario, Pikachu and Samus Aran battling it out, and how it's great for multiplayer fun. Fair play, it was a proper laugh at lunchtimes. Coming in at number 2, it's Jet Force Gemini from Rare, 2,151 points, and a 93% review, the same as Shadow Man. They call it a dream of a shoot-'em-up, but mention Nintendo wanted them to make it less grown-up, which is typical Nintendo, always a bit cautious. They thought it was original and exciting but hinted it didn't sell as well as expected. Bit underrated. Jet Force Gemini, proper Rare goodness. Warrington Norcus. Then they've got a list called And the Rest, which is basically games ranked 6th to 20th. In there you've got Resident Evil 2 from Capcom, Mario Golf from Nintendo, Episode 1 Racer from LucasArts, World Driver from Midway, Pokemon Stadium also from Nintendo, Rainbow Six by Mindscape, Turok Rage Wars and WWF Attitude both from Acclaim, Worms Armageddon from Infogrames, South Park Rally from Acclaim again, Mario Party from Nintendo, Quake 2 and Duke Nukem, 0 Hour both from GT, Rayman 2 from Ubisoft, and lastly F1 World Grand Prix 2 from Nintendo. So a fair mix of stuff, some classics in there for sure. Warranty. There's a section called One Last Winner, announcing Annette Simmons as the lucky person who won an N64 at a game. Apparently Zelda was her all-time favorite, and Super Smash Bros. Was her game of the year, with Rayman 2 at number 5. Good taste, Annette. Moving on to Best Developers, Rare wins it, no surprises there really. They mention Perfect Dark, Banjo-Tooie and Conker as reasons why. Acclaim get a shout out too for Shadow Man and their wrestling games. Nintendo also get a mention for Pokemon Stadium, HAL for Super Smash Bros, and THQ for WrestleMania 2000. Warrington Dorcas. Best Shooters goes to Jet Force Gemini, makes sense seeing as it was number 2 overall. They say it's hideously underrated and full of secrets. They also list Rainbow Six, Turok, Rage Wars, Quake 2, and Duke Nukem 0 Hour as other top shooters. Finally, Best Fighters goes to Super Smash Bros. Again, obvious choice really. They say it's a refreshing take on fighting games, and great for multiplayer. They also mention WWF WrestleMania 2000, WWF Attitude, Ready to Rumble and Knockout Kings 2000 in the Fighters category. Overall, a good snapshot of what folk were playing and rating on the N64 back then. This page is showcasing the readers' choices for Game of the Year 2000 in N64 Magazine, and blimey, Donkey Kong 64 took the top spot. Rightly so I reckon, that game was massive back then, proper sprawling adventure. It mentions, it got 2,908 points, and was reviewed at 93% in issue 36. Good score that. There's a list of our favourites, which is N64 Mag's top 11 of the year. Number 1 is Donkey Kong 64, with a score range of 64 to 95%. Bit of an odd way to score it, but there you go. Jet Force Gemini and Shadowman are joint second with 93%, Ridge Racer 64 is fourth at 91%, followed by World Driver Championship also at 91%. Then there's a bunch of joint sixth places all at 90%: Duke Nukem 0 Hour, Quake 2, Resi 2, Super Smash Bros, Top Gear Rally 2, and WWF WrestleMania 2000. Solid list, some cracking games in there, although Quake 2 on the N64 was a bit of a compromise compared to the PC version, if we're honest. Yay. Then they've got Best Platformers, unsurprisingly Donkey Kong 64 again. Best Sports has Mario Golf winning, a decent enough golf game on the N64, and mentions Premier Manager 64, Michael Owen's WLS, Tony Hawk's Skateboarding, and NBA Jam 2000 as well in that category. Best Racers goes to Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, which was a fast and flashy pod racer, just like the film. South Park Rally, F1 World GP2, and Top Gear Rally 3 are also listed there. Dagay. Finally, there's a could do better section for recent releases that didn't quite hit the mark. Pokemon Stadium, Ridge Racer 64 again, bit odd seeing that here after it being in favourites. Operation Winback and Perfect Dark are listed there too. Perfect Dark in could do better. Bit harsh, even if it did have some frame rate issues, it was still a belter of a game. Perhaps it was a bit rushed out the door. The next page showcases the readers' top picks for the best N64 games ever. GoldenEye 007 rightly takes the top spot with a massive points haul, cementing its legendary status. Super Mario 64 is in second place, which seems fair enough. It was revolutionary at the time, even if it is showing its age a bit now. Donkey Kong 64 is at number 3, which is probably a bit generous. It was good, but not that good. Mario Kart 64 comes in at number 4, still a multiplayer classic for a good reason. Rounding out the top 5 is Super Smash Bros., which was a proper surprise hit and a brilliant fighter. Boring to know. Beneath the top 5, there's a list of other games that got votes, like Jet Force Gemini, Banjo-Kazooie, and F-Zero X. It's a decent list showing the breadth of quality games on the N64. Then there are some smaller sections for best developers, where Nintendo is unsurprisingly number 1, followed by Rare and Acclaim. There's also Best Shooters, which is obviously topped by GoldenEye again, and Best Fighters, where Super Smash Bros. Wins out. Finally, there's a WHA section for awful games, listing titles like Mission, Impossible, and South Park as real stinkers. Looking back, yeah, some of those were properly bad. It's a nice snapshot of what people were thinking about N64 games back then. This page is all about the Readers' Awards from N64 Magazine, it seems. Right at the top, bang in your face, is The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time declared best game ever. Well, no arguments from me on that one, an absolute masterpiece, properly groundbreaking at the time. They're saying it got 3,383 points, which is miles ahead of anything else. Apparently GoldenEye was second, but way behind. Good to see Zelda get in the top spot. It was a proper epic adventure, wasn't it? Warranted. Then they've got categories for best platformers, and Super Mario 64 is still winning that one even though it was years old by this point. Says here it got 1387 points, Donkey Kong 64 is second, then Banjo-Kazooie, Toy Story 2 and Space Station, Silicon Valley making up the rest of the list. Good platformers all of them, though Mario 64 was just in a different league really. Best Sports has N98 at number 1, with 136 points, beating out Mario Golf, FIFA 99, ISS 64, and FIFA 98. Looks like the footy games were popular. ISS was always a bit more serious than FIFA back then if you ask me. Mario Golf, cracking fun if you wanted something a bit lighter. Carry Danger. Best Racers is Mario Kart 64 taking the crown, with a massive 752 points. No surprise there. Still the king of karting, isn't it? F-Zero X is second, then Diddy Kong Racing, 1080 Degrees Snowboarding, and F1 World Grand Prix. Good mix of races. F-Zero X was ridiculously fast. Diddy Kong Racing was a decent karting alternative, and 1080 Degrees was cool if you wanted something different from cars. There's a section called What Went Wrong, about games that were a bit underrated. Blast Corps, Yoshi's Story, Duke Nukem, Zero Hour, Quake 2, The New Tetris, Buster Move 2, and Glover. Bit of a mixed bag, some decent games in there, maybe not all classics but still worth a look. Warrington. Lastly, there's a bit called War is Over. Looks like they're just settling some debates about which game is better than another. Mario Kart 64 beat Diddy Kong Racing, F-Zero X beat Wipeout 64, GoldenEye beat Turok 2, that sort of thing. Mostly obvious winners, to be honest, but good to have it cleared up, eh? This page is all about the handheld games, specifically the Game Boy. Looks like N64 Magazine is giving a shout out to the little grey brick, calling it Game Boy Planet. Fair enough, it was still massive back then. Right in the middle we've got a big old Pikachu for Pokemon Yellow proclaiming, "New! This time it's Pikachu!" Bit obvious in it, it's Pokemon Yellow. They're reviewing it. Surprise surprise. Ruby. There's also a reviewed this issue, box pointing out Wario Land 3 on page 44. He's back to take some more punishment. See that fat boy burn? Charming. And Top Gear Rally 2 on page 46, wondering if it's the best racer on the Game Boy. Yup, confident bunch these reviewers. And if you're feeling lucky, there's a competition to win a Game Boy Power Pack and wallet, and you can even stick your Game Boy camera pics in it. Remember those grainy black and white photos? Classics. Classics. Bottom right says issue 48, July 2000. So yeah, right in the middle of the Pokemon craze, and Game Boy still kicking it. Pretty standard issue of the time, really. This page is all about the Game Boy presence at E3. It seems the big buzz was around Pokemon, no surprise there really back then. Apparently Pokemon Yellow was still considered a hot title, even with Gold and Silver just around the corner, due to land in October for you Americans, and Nintendo were expecting to sell a mountain of them by Easter the following year. They were even doing new downloads, though in typical Nintendo fashion, all a bit secretive on the details of when and where. Aside from Pokemon, it mentions a few other Game Boy games that were highlights that month, like Wario Land 3, TG Rally 2, and Martian Alert. Good solid games if memory serves. It also touches on the fact that Game Boy was selling like hotcakes, beating even the NES and PlayStation, which is quite something when you think about it. They were already talking about the Game Boy Advance too, with loads of developers signed up. Yay. Nintendo had a Conker-themed bar, a bit random, but hey. Every stand seemed to have Game Boy Color machines showing off games. Some decent stuff, and some probably a load of rubbish, as always. Pokemon Gold and Silver were highlighted, showing off the English translation and the Americanized names for the new monsters. There's mention of some other titles like Legend of Harvest Moon and River King 2, which were probably alright if you were into those types of games. They also mentioned survival horror with Alone in the Dark on the Game Boy Color, which sounds a bit ambitious for the old handheld. Oh, and something called Tyrannosaurus Tex, a first-person shooter, which, well, interesting choice of name. Cheshire. There's a bit about a massive Lego Game Boy Color, like a proper monster of a thing, and they were running a competition to guess how many Lego bricks it took to build it. Apparently someone reckoned a zillion. Sounds about right for marketing hype, doesn't it? Overall, it was all about Game Boy at that E3. This page is a pick of the show section dedicated to upcoming Game Boy Color games. First up is Legend of Zelda Triforce series from Nintendo. They are really pushing the link-up feature, and it's color only, due out in autumn. Apparently it's the start of a new Zelda trilogy for the Game Boy, even though it was developed in Japan and in Japanese for now. They're saying it looks like Capcom's Tale of Power, another belter for the Miyamoto series, which is always good to hear. The story is the classic Ganon messing things up, this time by kidnapping Zelda and making the seasons go haywire in Hyrule. Link, as always, has to sort it out and restore balance. It involves the Triforce, the Rod of Seasons and the Four Seasons, and mentions a spooky other dimension, plus new characters, Ricky and Maypile. Sounds a bit kooky, doesn't it? The next two games are Tale of Courage and Tale of Wisdom. They reckon we won't see them till next year, and the clever bit is you can link all three games to transfer data and send Link hopping between cartridges to finish the quest. They're even speculating on how the link-up works, wondering about lock-on cartridges or maybe infrared. Sounds intriguing indeed, and a bit fiddly if you ask me. Then there's Perfect Dark from Rare, also with link-up, color only, coming in September. They say Joanna Dark's first portable adventure isn't too shabby, and Rare has gone to town on animation and effects. The story is a prequel to the N64 game, Joanna being a trainee agent. It's got the Carrington Institute, Jonathan and Mr. Carrington in it. There's talk of a combat simulator and first-person sections, with Joanna flying out to South America. Apparently the Game Boy edition clears up a few loose ends from the N64 version, and you can use the transfer pack for cheats, and it's got a rumble pack, two-player link mode, infrared data swapping and even saving progress to hard copy. It works with the Game Boy printer but not the camera. Bit of a weird exclusion that. They think it'll do justice to the PD name, which is a big claim. Next is Donkey Kong Country from Nintendo. Link up, color only, August release. They're calling it the game that changed how people looked at the SNES on the Game Boy. Donkey Kong Country's pre-rendered graphics were mind-blowing back in '94, and Rare have crammed the whole thing onto a handheld. It's virtually identical to the original, just with a reduced color palette. All the levels are the same, with Rambi, Winky, Ingward and Squawks. All the sidekicks are there. It's Diddy's debut apparently, and Rare's first go at the DK franchise. Before DKC, Donkey Kong was just the bad guy in scaffolding in Super Mario Kart Jr. Sounds like they are retconning things a bit there. They're calling it his 3D makeover. As a bonus, there are two-player games, and you can collect DK stickers to print out. Stickers, eh? That's a bit of alright. Okay. Lastly, there's Warlocked from Nintendo. Link up, color only, July in the US. It's a genuine real-time strategy game in miniature. You can play as humans or beasts, and you have to use the environment and beat the other army. They're saying it works surprisingly well, considering strategy games are usually mouse and keyboard affairs. The buttons do context-sensitive actions, depending on what unit you select and what you tell it to do. For example, targeting a tree makes your units chop it down, targeting a damaged building makes them repair it, and targeting enemy troops makes them attack. You can make custom armies and trade stuff via the infrared port, and there's a two-player mode for ultimate battles. Review coming soon, they say. This page is a review of Pokemon for the old Game Boy. Pokemon, remember that? Massive thing back in the day. This is N64 Planet Magazine, issue 18. Pikachu's plastered all over it, the electric rodent, with Meowth, Machop and Jigglypuff hanging around, the usual faces. Apparently there's this new intro with Pikachu doing all sorts fighting, surfing, running, floating and zapping. Slightly OTT, but the kids went nuts for it. Screenshots show bits of gameplay, like catching Pokemon and Viridian Forest, which everyone spent hours grinding in. They've got their star rating, 5 stars being essential purchase, and 1 being avoid like the plague. Seems they were quite impressed with Pokemon. Likely gave it a solid rating. It was a bit of a phenomenon back then, you couldn't escape it. This page is a review of Pokemon Yellow, Special Pikachu Edition for the Game Boy. Right then, so it's priced at £25, a save of £5, and it's for on-cart link-up, but it's no color, and it was out June 16th. Seems fair enough. The reviewer is talking about how Pokemon is still massive, mentioning the trading cards and toys, which is all very true. It was a craze back then, wasn't it? They call it a tweaked version of Red and Blue, with better graphics, plot tweaks, and Pikachu as the star. Hardcore Pokemon fans probably already got it imported from America, as it was out there a while before, but for the rest of us, it was the one to get, apparently. They're questioning if we should be forking out for yet another version of Pokemon, which is a valid point. Cash cow, wasn't it? And there are screenshots showing gameplay. One bit is about surfing Pikachu. If you use Pikachu to surf, you get a special surfboard animation, which is a nice little touch, I suppose. Another screenshot shows a battle against a Metapod, classic early game fodder. And there's a bit about talking to Pikachu, just like the Pocket Pikachu virtual pet. Apparently your Pikachu in yellow starts off moody, but gets happier as you look after it. If you chat to it, its face pops up, and you might even get a digitized Pika sound effect. Blastoise and Venusaur are featured in the artwork, so the big hitters are all present and correct. All in all, looks like a decent enough review for the Pokemon faithful, even if some of us might have been getting a bit Pokemoned out by this point. This page is a review section diving into the start of Pokemon Yellow on the Game Boy. It's titled New Beginnings, and walks through the opening moments for anyone familiar with Red and Blue, pointing out the differences. It starts with the classic scenario trying to leave Pallet Town when Professor Oak stops you to warn about wild Pokemon. But in Yellow, right on cue, a wild Pikachu pops up ready for a scrap. Oak, being the helpful professor, catches it for you in a Pokeball, before Gary shows up in the lab and cheekily nabs the last Pokeball and the Eevee inside. So you're stuck with Pikachu, but the review points out that's no problem as Pikachu can thrash Eevee anyway. After the fight, Gary moans about picking the wrong Pokemon, which is a bit rich coming from him. And finally, it mentions Pikachu's dislike of Pokeballs, which is a new quirk in Yellow. There's also a section called A New Chew that looks at how much Pikachu has changed visually between the original Red and Blue versions and the Yellow version, which came after the cartoon. It notes the Red and Blue Pikachu had less definition, a bendier body, and looked a bit more manga style, while the Yellow version Pikachu is the Hollywood version, all cute and cuddly with extra blush and angled ears, basically the cartoon Pikachu everyone knows. They even printed out the stats screen for Yellow Pikachu showing its attack, defense, speed and special stats, and that it's an electric type. Classic Game Boy era stuff really. This page is a bit of a retro throwback in it. It's looking at Pokemon Red and Blue, proper Game Boy stuff. They're calling it its Strife Gym, which is a bit dramatic for facing Brock, the first gym leader. It's essentially a walkthrough of how to beat him in Pewter City. They start by saying if you picked Bulbasaur you'd breeze through it, which is fair enough, grass types rinse rock. Then they tell you to chat to the geek, to learn electric moves are useless, which is obvious, but helpful if you were a total N00B back then. They mention Brock's had a facelift, to look like his anime version. Yeah, the sprites were a bit basic back then, weren't they? Then it's all sweet, Brock wants to fight, and they're saying to light him up like a Christmas tree with Pikachu, which is a bit optimistic. Next bit's called Cheat, but it's not really cheating, just pointing out Geodude and Onix are immune to electric attacks. Bit obvious again. They're hilariously suggesting using Rattata against them, which is just awful advice. Warrington Nooks. Finally, Beats section, showing a load of fainted Pokemon. They're joking about only having Pikachu, and a useless Metapod left. Yeah, Pikachu against Brock was a pain. We all went through that, struggling with our electric mouse against bloody rock monsters. Good times, hard times. Up top there's a bit called Spaced Out, rambling about space shuttles in Nintendo games. Apparently it's a long-standing Nintendo tradition, bit of a stretch that. They mention Tetris and Blast Corps. Blast Corps was brilliant on the N64, proper underrated game, loads of explosions. And apparently you can find a space shuttle in the Pewter City Science Museum in Pokemon. Never really noticed that, to be honest. They even wish they could take a ride in the Space Shuttle Columbia, bless them, published in July 2000, a bit before the disaster, makes you think. This page is all about getting Pikachu to surf in Pokemon Yellow, which was a bit of a cool secret at the time. It's a step-by-step guide, starting with finding the right hut south of Fuchsia City, mind you. This is only in Yellow, not Red or Blue, so don't go looking for it there. You have to chat to a bloke in the hut who's got a surfing Pikachu, and then you get to play this surfing minigame at Pikachu's beach. It's all about using the control pad to make Pikachu do tricks on the waves. Looks like a bit of a basic game, but they reckon it's a cool little bonus. ATA. The article also talks about Pokemon Yellow in general. They say it's more or less the same as Red and Blue, but with Pikachu playing a bigger role, being like the mascot from the cartoon that was doing the rounds back then. They mention how massive Pokemon had become, with kids going bonkers for the cards and the cartoon. Seems like the reviewer thought Yellow was a good version, especially for younger players getting into the whole Japanese RPG thing. They call it a fantastic game but a sparse update, which is a bit of a backhanded compliment, isn't it? Still, Surfing Pikachu, that was a neat touch. The next page in the mag is all about Pokemon on the Game Boy, labeled Virtual Pets. Right, so this takes me back. It's talking about how your Pokemon learn moves as they gain experience, and you can choose to accept or reject new moves. A bit of depth for a handheld game back then. It mentions you can only have 4 moves at a time, which was a tactical element you had to consider. Then there's a section on growing, which is just leveling up really. Your Pokemon gets stronger from level 1 to 100 and evolves at certain levels. They point out you can stop evolution if you want, which some purists did. It shows a Nidoking evolving, a decent monster that. Finally, Hospitalized. Charming is about healing your injured Pokemon at Pokemon Centers, which is a free service in every town. A staple of the game loop. They mention you use these centers regularly, as your monsters get thumped in battle. Ha. And they say in Pokemon Yellow it's the only time you see Pikachu in a Pokeball. Which is true, that little yellow blighter was always out and about. Behazer. There's a little bit about catching monsters too, with a screenshot of an old man using a Pokeball. And a box reminding you trainers in front of you mean a fight. Classic Pokemon stuff. It also mentions the surfing minigame in Yellow, calling it a powerful incentive. A bit of a stretch, it was a novelty, wasn't it? The review seems a bit lukewarm on Pokemon Yellow overall, suggesting if you already have Red or Blue, maybe stick with those unless you really want to play through again or are desperate for the surfing Pikachu. They give it a 5 out of 5 star rating though, which is generous. Maybe they were just trying to be positive. Well, Pokemon was huge back then, you couldn't move for it. This page is a review section, taking a look at Wario Land 3 and Pong. First up, Wario Land 3 for the Game Boy, and they're clearly loving it, giving it a solid 5 stars. They're bigging up Wario, even saying he's better than Luigi, which is fighting talk to some, I reckon. Sounds like your typical Wario affair, treasure hunting and transforming into all sorts of weird things after getting bashed about by enemies. Apparently he can turn into a zombie and fall through floors, which is a bit grim for a platformer, isn't it? They mention a day and night thing, which is a bit fancy for a Game Boy game back then. And a golfing sub-game, well that's just getting carried away. They're even wondering why Wario's wearing a white shirt. Deep stuff. Jupu. Jupu. Then there's Pong, right? 1 star. Ouch. They're being proper sarcastic about Atari bigging up the original Pong, comparing it to a Dunlop advert and the invention of the wheel. Bit harsh, but fair enough, it is just Pong, innit? Apparently this version is based on a PlayStation game, but with less color, obviously, being on the Game Boy. They say it's got improved versions with extra paddles and obstacles, which sounds thrilling. They tried playing it on hard, and got battered by the computer, and there's no 2-player, so it's a bit pointless really. Soccer Pong version is apparently the easiest, which isn't saying much. Logs in the middle of some versions act as rollers. Still, 1 star. Sums it up really. This page has reviews for a couple of Game Boy Color games, Ballistic and Martian Alert. Ballistic is a puzzle game, bit like Puyo Puyo or Bust a Move. You know the type, match 3 colors and all that. This one has a spiral of balls coming towards you, and you shoot balls from the middle to make them disappear. They reckon it's addictive and a decent alternative to Tetris and Bust a Move. They gave it a solid 4 out of 5, not bad for a handheld puzzler. Ooh! Then there's Martian Alert, which is a Looney Tunes game but apparently doesn't shout about it on the box. It's an adventure game where you play as Bugs Bunny, and can unlock other characters like Daffy and Elmer Fudd. Sounds like you're collecting bits of a teleporter to stop Marvin the Martian. Typical Looney Tunes stuff. It's got a decent number of levels and characters, and even some infrared multiplayer minigames, which was a bit of a gimmick back then, wasn't it? This one also got a 4 out of 5 stars, so both games are alright apparently. This page is taking a look at some Game Boy games, alright. First up we've got TG Rally 2. Chemcoair, 25 quid, on-cart save, link-up play and colour, which is decent for the Game Boy Color. Only out now, it says, like we didn't know that already. They're giving it a 4 out of 5, which is pretty good going for a handheld racer back then. Geiger. Right, so apparently the first Top Gear Rally on the Game Boy wasn't all that amazing, but this sequel is a lot better. They reckon it's more fun to play, which is always a bonus, isn't it? It's still got the championships, time trials and arcade modes. They're saying the cars are easier to handle, less likely to spin out, which sounds like they've listened to the complaints. The reviewer here is going on about the bends reminding them of Sega arcade racers, like Hang On. Bit of a stretch, maybe, but I see what they mean in a pixelated sort of way. Apparently the computer cars are right annoying, and will try to block you all the time. Sounds about right for a Game Boy racer. It does save your best time trial data, which was a good feature back then, and you can link up with a mate for 2-player, which was always a laugh on the Game Boy if you had the cable. They're mentioning turbo starts, power slides, suspension rolls. Trying to sound fancy, aren't they? And they even point out that computer cars sometimes take shortcuts through the grass. Cheeky beggars. Still, they reckon it's definitely worth investigating, and with a 4-star score I'd say they are onto something. Then we've got Le Mans 24 Hours, from Infogrames. Also 25 quid, on-cart save, but no link up this time, and colour again. Only out now. They've only given this one 3 out of 5 stars. Thinking big, but 24 hours? Bit dramatic, lads. Apparently it's a serious racing sim, which is a bit much for a Game Boy, isn't it? They're saying choose championship mode, and it's a proper test of endurance, with pit stops, car damage, and variable weather. Variable weather on the Game Boy? Bit ambitious. Select arcade, and you get power-ups apparently, to make things a bit easier. They reckon Le Mans 24 Hours is a harder game than TG Rally 2. The cars slide all over the place, and it's a mini version of World Driver, they say, which was alright from what I remember. The reviewer is talking about needing judicious use of the brakes and careful taps on the D-pad to keep the car on the road. Sounds like a right handful. Graphics are impressive for the Game Boy, they're saying, and the tracks move smoothly, even when you're flat out. Fog effects are good too, apparently, like in Suzuki All-Star on the PlayStation, which is a bit of an odd comparison, but alright. Apparently the fog makes it really hard to see, but you can pick up a light bulb power-up for temporary clarity in arcade mode. Light bulb power-up? Alright then. Alright. So there you have it. TG Rally 2 is the winner on this page with 4 stars, and Le Mans 24 Hours gets a respectable 3, both for the Game Boy, and both probably cost a bit more than they should have back in the day. This page is a review section from Planet Game Boy. Looks like July 2000 going by the corner. First up is Crazy Castle 4, a Game Boy Color title from Kemco, priced at £25. Right, Crazy Castle, that's the one with Bugs Bunny. Always a bit of a platform puzzler, wasn't it? The review reckons if a game gets to number 4 it must be doing something right, but then points out it's not exactly Mario. They say it's pretty much the same as the previous ones visually, but now in color. Gameplay-wise it's still about searching through doors and collecting keys. Mazes get harder with moving floors and bouncy mushrooms. Sounds a bit samey if you've played them before, but they suggest it might be worth a look in a bargain bin. They've given it a star rating of 3 out of 5. Screenshots show Bugs Bunny looking a bit puzzled, and some typical side-scrolling action, very Game Boy Color graphics, as you'd expect. Next up is Blaster Master, Enemy Below from Sunsoft, also £25. They're asking if there are enough good shoot-'em-ups on the Game Boy Color. They mention R-Type DX and Duke Nukem. Reckon there were some decent Konami arcade conversions too. If you've played Metal Slug Pocket, you'll get the idea, a little bloke in a tank shooting his way through platform levels. They say it switches to a top-down view in certain parts, which is a bit different. Graphics are a bit 80s throwback apparently, not great, enemies are just blobs. They also mention the bullets miss by a pixel or two, which sounds annoying. They do say the outdoor sections are good though, but overall it's nowhere near as good as Duke Nukem or Metal Slug. Bit harsh maybe. They've given this one a 2 out of 5 stars. The screenshots show the tank in action, looks a bit basic to be honest, even for Game Boy Color. Definitely not going to be troubling Metal Slug anytime soon, is it? This page is all about the mighty Game Boy, calling it the sale of the century. They're banging on about how it's sold over 100 million units, which is a bonkers number for a handheld, even now. They reckon there are 2 main reasons for its success. First up is Tetris. Apparently if Nintendo hadn't nabbed the rights to Tetris, the Game Boy might have flopped. It sounds like it was a bit of a legal battle to get it sorted, with some Soviet ministry and some software house involved. They made it sound like the creator of Tetris didn't even make much dosh from it back then, which is a bit rough. The second reason is Pokémon. They say sales were dipping a bit in the mid-90s, probably because everyone was getting hyped for the PlayStation, but then Pokémon came along and saved the day. They mention the Game Boy Pocket with its fancy new look, but it was Pokémon that really did the trick when it landed in Japan in '96. Apparently, N64 Magazine was even banging on about Pikachu way back in issue 7, calling it a small yellow cat, which is a bit of a weird description, even for back then. They're kind of saying that nobody outside of Japan really knew what Pokémon was back then. There's a bit of a daft calculation about how long a line of 100 million Game Boys would be, stretching from Kyoto to Bath, or London to LA, or even making a massive portrait of Shigzilgi's face. Bit silly really, but it's filling up space I suppose. They finish off by asking where Nintendo would be without Pokémon, and show off the red and blue versions box art with Charizard, Blastoise and Bulbasaur. Good games they were, good games. This page is all about tips, scores, guides and the gallery, classic N64 mag stuff. First up, there's a bit on Grand Theft Auto. They're calling it GTA style, which is funny, like it's some established genre already. Basically, if you're struggling, they tell you to get yourself killed loads, then switch the Game Boy off and on again, and boom, next level. Cheeky, but that's how we rolled back then, didn't have YouTube walkthroughs every 5 minutes. Mega. Then there's Dragon Warrior Monsters for the Game Boy Color. They are giving tips for breeding monsters to get good ones, like the Dragon Lord and Agothicada, which sounds a bit rubbish if I'm honest. They also mention feeding monsters meat to help them learn moves and level up faster, and that you shouldn't wipe out enemies too quickly in battles. Apparently your monsters respect you for it. Who knew monsters had such delicate feelings? E.T. Street Fighter Alpha gets a look in too. They are calling players soft if they can't beat the bosses without cheats. Bit harsh that. Anyway, to fight Akuma you hold down A and B when you pick your character, and select manual or auto. For Bison you do the same, but you hold down A, B and select. Everyone knew these codes back then, you had to, before the internet was everywhere. True. Rayman on the Game Boy Color is up next. Apparently, it looks like an angel, but plays like Satan with roids, which is a bit graphic, even for N64 Magazine. To get 99 lives, you pause and tap in a code. Some button combo I can't be bothered to repeat. Typical cheat code stuff. Shrilitse. Finally, there's the high score section. Alan McNonigal cleaned up in Tetris DX, good on him. Loads of high scores listed for Pokemon Pinball, Mario Deluxe, Tetris DX and Game & Watch Gallery. Loads of names I don't recognize, but fair play to them for getting their names in the mag. It was a big deal back then. And if you want to send your scores in, there's an address and email. Proper old school. This page is all about the Game Boy Gallery, a bit of fun in the magazine where readers sent in their snaps taken with the Game Boy camera. Remember that thing? Mad little add-on, but everyone loved it back then. It's a collection of these loafy, grainy pictures, each with a little caption. There's a winner picture at the top, someone with a funny face, classic. Then you've got a mutant with 2 faces, apparently from Luke Adams, and someone called Devon Owen Barrett who's got rare eyes. Blimey, these descriptions are a bit much. There's a sleeping father, and another anonymous effort, and then some blurry cat pictures. One is plush, apparently. Someone's taken a picture of dung with bits stuck in it. Charming. DJ Mike Reed gets a mention, and then there's a double-headed mutie. It's all a bit random really. Classic user-generated content before that was even a proper term. They're also asking for more freaks to be sent in, and offering a Game Master Power Pack as a prize. Those battery packs were always handy. Just a bit of daftness really, highlighting the fun you could have with the Game Boy camera. This page is all about Perfect Dark. Right then, that's just silly, it says at the top, and it's talking about the fun you can have moving furniture around, even using it as a shield. Which is a bit daft but adds to the silliness, doesn't it? Below that is Incy Wincy Spider, referring to the character movement, comparing it to GoldenEye, and saying it's more realistic but still funny when your mates move like deformed spiders. They're having a laugh, aren't they? Warrington move. The main headline screams perfect and perfect game, so they're clearly impressed. The main text starts with, "It's a great big world out there," and talks about how Perfect Dark is jam-packed with surprises, just like GoldenEye was, mentioning corporate lifts and waistcoat-wearing aliens as examples of the bonkers stuff in there. They reckon Rare has pulled out all the stops on the storyline, which is good to hear, as some of their earlier story efforts were a bit ropey according to them. They are impressed with the cutscenes, saying there's over 30 minutes of them, and think Perfect Dark is doing things you wouldn't believe possible on the N64. They're promising loads of surprises and wizardry, and are highlighting some of the delights on offer. There are little captions with arrows pointing to screenshots, like, "Joe's sis is lumbered with hand-me-downs," and "The portly boss, looking natty in spats, don't smack." Another one says, "Rare are playing with us, that's bulletproof glass, so he's safe." And another highlights a lift ride as a stunning moment. They also mention lovely corporate HQs and daytime lighting, and then, "This comes after that morphing N." Finally, "Don't shoot everyone, she's evil but useful." It's all snippets to get you intrigued about the game, isn't it? Perfect Dark then, looks like it's gonna be a cracker. This page delves into the world of Perfect Dark, a proper cracker of a game on the N64. It's talking about some of the extra bits you can unlock once you've put a good few hours into it. First up is The Jewel in the Crown, a series of one-on-one fights in the Carrington Institute training area. Sounds like some classic Wild West-style standoffs against Datadyne guards, Jonathan Dark, and even Trent Easton himself. A nice little extra challenge that. Then there's Could You Pop In, Ms. Dark, which is having a bit of a laugh about Joanna Dark's disguises. Air hostess, eh? They point out that while she gets access to places, you can still ruin your cover if you act out of character, like slapping people. Probably good advice in general, actually. It mentions the Game Boy Color version, and suggests it might have a fire exit demo and a power-up that gives you orange makeup. Sounds a bit daft, but who knows? Watch Them Die is a charmingly titled section about some of the more, shall we say, entertaining ways to dispatch enemies. Don't get up describes shooting a guard in the Datadyne building before he's even emailed his mum, making him slump in his chair. Bit harsh, but funny, in a dark way I suppose. Hitty. Is that working? Talks about a level where you sneak up on a scientist and guard testing a new weapon. You can eavesdrop on their chat before blowing the nonces to another world. Bit strong language for N64 Magazine, isn't it? They finish with a slightly cheeky, "Was it good for you, baby?" A bit much perhaps. Pick up the gun highlights a feature players suggested, which is shooting guns out of enemies' hands. Apparently Rare listened, which is good of them. Smarter guards will even dodge and pick up their weapon again, so you can't just disarm everyone with ease. Finally, Up with the Villa is about the Carrington Villa level, praising the level design and color scheme. You can apparently use rooftop snipers and enjoy watching enemies dramatically fall to their doom. Nicely, they say. Well, each to their own I suppose. Yol. Overall, it's a pretty standard preview of Perfect Dark, focusing on some of the less obvious features and gameplay quirks. Typical N64 Magazine fare, really, having a bit of fun whilst giving you the info. This page is all about guns on the roof. Seems like a guide to some of the more interesting weapons and cheats in Perfect Dark. First up we have the Psychosis gun. Described as causing instant hilarity. Sounds right. That gun was a proper laugh, making enemies attack each other. Then there's Combat Boost, which is like a bizarre ultra-violence drug, very John Woo. Apparently slows everything down for some ballistic slow-motion gunplay and punching. Next is the N-Bomb, a grenade that makes enemies drop their weapons and wander around like idiots, which the mag reckons is impressively humiliating in multiplayer. Moving on, they're talking about cheats under the title, Fast Like a Cheetah. Marquis of Queensberry mode is mentioned, which makes guards fight with their fists. Apparently they just rush you, so shoot them before they get close, easy peasy. Then there's Invincible mode, which is just classic invincibility. The article jokes it's for appreciating the AI and enemy behavior without getting shot. And then, the fun begins. Finally, enemy rocket launchers. They're saying the AI for GoldenEye class enemies has been tweaked in Perfect Dark, so they're now intelligent enough to run away from rockets, meaning you can't just rely on blowing them up, you have to be more tactical. Apparently the best bit is disarming them as they die. Classic. There's also a bit about who cut the cheese, mentioning a piece of cheese hidden in the Datadyne building, some Swiss variety by the sounds of it, and another secret, I'm in the mood for dancing. A pole dancing club in an urban setting, Duke Nukem style, needing a Magnum and X-ray scanner to get in. Typical Rare humor, eh? This page showcasing Perfect Dark. Right then, what have we got here? Looks like they're kicking off with a laser weapon, calling it a modernized Moonraker jobby. Yeah, alright, it's a decent enough pew-pew, especially with the infinite ammo secondary fire. Makes a bit of a difference, doesn't it? Take 2 lasers into combat? Not Joe. Bit cheeky. Or. Then it's diving into the details in Perfect Dark, calling it God is in the details. Talking about Carrington's bachelor pad, microwaved meals, guns on the Datadyne reception desk for emergencies, even urinals. They're really going into it, aren't they? Oh, and the toilets, lavs, bogs as they call them. Sorry mate section, bit of toilet humor, very sophisticated. Apparently there's an occupied toilet you can find. Toilet scouting enjoyment, very droll. Classic weapons section, yeah, they've tweaked all the old favorites from GoldenEye, haven't they? Names are different, but apparently they're mostly the same. Red crosshair for nostalgia, that's a nice touch. Clob's even more erratic than usual, blimey. And the AR-53, they reckon it's matured nicely. Whatever that means. Slow-mo feature, they're calling it the Mr. Miyagi cheat. Lets you become the perfect player. Dodging bullets, dancing around guards, and delivering a knuckle sandwich door to door. Sounds a bit over the top, even for Perfect Dark. Finally, small characters, these dwarf-like enemies, ineffectual mushrooms round a great oak tree. Bit harsh. They're shorter than Oddjob, the original multiplayer cheat, or Elvis, who's apparently the new one for Perfect Dark. And they are paradoxically quite hard to punch, so clumsy then. Follow the yellow brick road to hell. Alright, bit dramatic, but it's Perfect Dark, innit? This page from N64 Magazine looks like a cracking lineup of reviews and previews. We've got Excitebike 64 taking center stage, proclaiming, "We dish the dirt." Right below that, there's a nod to checking out the import arena, for those of us who were keen on games from America and Japan. Around to the right, we see Taz Express getting some love. It's described as a platformer from Z2, pondering if it will send us into a spin. Cheeky. And then of course there's the big one at the bottom, The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask. They are saying Link is back, and not a moment too soon, and questioning if it can measure up to Ocarina of Time. High praise indeed if it does, eh? Looks like we're being directed to pages 58, 62 and 64 to read the full reviews of these titles, so looks like a packed issue, plenty to get stuck into on this page alone. This page from N64 Magazine, eh? Right then, it's all about how they review games. Bit of a how it works guide for the readers. They're laying it on thick about being experts and making definitive judgments. Typical magazine bluster. There's this info burst section which is supposed to give you the lowdown on a game at a glance. They've used Metroid 64 feet as an example, cheeky, seeing as that never existed on the N64 officially. It's got the publisher as Nintendo, cart size 256 megabits, 14 players, controller pack needed but no cartridge save, password save, expansion pack, rumble pack or transfer pack. Release dates are listed as April in the US, May in the UK and November in Japan, and it's priced at £40. Bit of a wishful thinking section then, more than info. They've got a section for folks in a rush, saying you can just look at the pluses and minuses and the verdict. Then there's an if you like this bit, where they recommend games similar to the reviewed one. For some reason they've put Mickey Mouse 64 feet as an example here. Bit odd, that game doesn't exist either, unless they're being sarcastic about the quality of some games maybe? Anyway, they say if you liked GoldenEye you might like Turok 2 or Quake 2. Standard FPS fare of the time, Cheshire. Then they break down their scoring system. 90% and above gets you a Star Game badge, meaning it's top tier. 85% and above is still Star Game material after playing right through. 84% to 70% is still good, worth your money. 69% to 50% is playable, but not special. 49% to 20% is lazily programmed rubbish to be avoided. And 19% to 0% is just a disaster. Absolute wretched crud as they put it. Bit harsh, but fair enough. Jeer. Finally, there's a Team 64 inches section, where they've all had a go on Excitebike 64. Andrea Ball apparently rode straight into the office and flattened Mark. Justin Webb was confused by the lack of a steering wheel. Mark Green reckons he almost crashed into a tree. Martin Kitts describes gore on the bike's windshield charming. Paul Edwards was confused about it being a radical mechanical surfing machine. And Alan Madrell nearly vanished in Bath. Neil P. Doe calls swooning mums somehow. And Pikachu. Well, Pikachu just makes Pikachu noises while revving a bike. Sounds like a typical chaotic day at the magazine. Larking about on motorbikes for research. Game of the month seems to be Excitebike 64, and Majora's Mask for some of them, and Taz Express for Darkmark. Right then, that's the review process explained. In a nutshell. This page is all about Excitebike 64, looks like a preview from N64 Magazine issue 43. They're saying goodbye Jeremy McGrath, hello Tricky Ricky Stern, which is a bit of a dig at Jeremy McGrath. Supercross 2000, I reckon, implying Excitebike is the better bike game. In the previously an N64 bit, they're talking about the graphics using the expansion pack. Sensibly, they say Excitebike uses a medium race mode that's alright, comparing it to Donkey Kong and Perfect Dark, which is a fair point. But they also mention a highers mode that's supposedly jerky and makes everything look squashed, so they recommend sticking with the normal res. Sensible advice really. Highers modes back then could be a bit hit and miss, usually more miss if you ask me. Heck yes. Loads of screenshots dotted around showing off the gameplay. One caption says, "Not a conventional route around this course but a pretty one all the same. Looks like they're racing in some desert canyon level." Another one says, "Excitebike isn't always so kind with crash barriers. Yeah, those N64 games could be a bit unforgiving. Big humps make for big jumps, big air, and no mistake, classic Excitebike stuff, getting some airtime. The thin indoor tracks make for plenty of skin-ripping collisions. Indoors tracks could get a bit chaotic alright. There are also some gameplay tips mixed in with captions. Keep a close eye on that temp gauge. The temperature gauge was always a pain in the neck in Excitebike games, needed to cool down, or you'd seize up. You'll need godlike biking to beat the 25's record lap. Bit dramatic, aren't they? But it was a challenging game. Missing the campfires here is all too easy. Campfires? Sounds like an outdoor track with some hazards. Interesting. Look out below. Time it right and you can land on his head. Bit of a risky jump there then. Just a little bit higher. Subtle handling is Excitebike 64's best feature. Yeah, the handling in Excitebike was always pretty tight. Then there's an info burst box. It says Excitebike 64 is from Nintendo, a 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players. Controller pack needs 44 pages. Blimey, that's a fair bit. No cartridge save or password save. No expansion pack needed apparently. Rumble pack and transfer pack compatible. When's it out? Now in the US, July in the UK, TBA in Japan, costing £45. Seems like a standard N64 release info box. Shushra. The text around the info box mentions that N64 games are getting inspiration from past games, mentioning Kirby and Space Invaders coming up. It calls Excitebike 64 a 3D interpretation of the NES game, saying it keeps the original simplicity and allows speed. They're asking if it does the original justice, which is the big question really. Sounds like they're cautiously optimistic about it. Overall, seems like a decent preview, not overly gushing, just stating the facts and a few opinions. This page is all about getting to grips with Excitebike 64. That's Excitebike 64 of course, not just 64 on its own. Thank you very much. Seems they're giving some cycling proficiency tips for the mountain quarry track. Classic Excitebike gameplay really. They're talking about CPU opponents being a bit rough at the start, using turbo and the downslopes for jumps, and general cornering advice. Number 4 on the list points out a shortcut through a tunnel, handy for shaving off a few seconds. Then there's advice about riding through water and keeping an eye on the temperature gauge, and another tip about a nasty corner that needs some braking. Finally, they mention getting enough speed for some nightmarish bumps near the finish line. Below that, they're showing off the track editor in Excitebike 64. It says it's a welcome bonus, if a bit samey in the tracks it creates. They even built a dirt track with a big hill and found the computer riders got stuck on it. Which sounds about right for some N64 AI back then, bless 'em. There's a little screenshot of the track editor menu, with options like add straight, add turn, add jump, and so on. Looks fairly straightforward if you wanted to build your own crazy tracks. And in a going back in time bit on the side, it mentions that Excitebike 64 has a pixel-perfect version of the original NES Excitebike hidden in it, and an improved 3D version too. Nice touch to bring back the old school, even if the 3D version probably didn't hold a candle to the main game. Still, Excitebike 64, a solid racer from back in the day. This page is all about Excitebike 64, looks like a review. They are saying it's pretty impressive, especially the physics. I remember Excitebike on the NES, so seeing it in 3D on the N64 was quite something back then. They are saying the bikes are well modelled, which is true enough, and there's a tip about flicking your back wheel to knock riders off. Classic arcade move. They mention a training section, and that completing it unlocks the original NES Excitebike, which was a nice touch for us old school gamers. They're comparing it to 1080 snowboarding, which was another good one, and Jeremy McGrath's Supercross, another motorbike game, to show how far video game developers had come with motocross titles. They are talking about the controls being initially a bit odd, but once you get used to them, it's all good, and the physics being flawless. They reckon it's one of the best looking courses since 1080, high praise at the time, and that it's an informative training section. They also mentioning the stunts and bonus views you get, and tree branches not being a threat, which is a bit of a silly detail, but hey, it's a magazine review. Overall it sounds like they were pretty chuffed with Excitebike 64. It was a decent game I recall. This page is all about Excitebike 64 and its bonus games. It seems they've packed a fair bit into this game beyond just your standard racing, which is pretty good value. In it, they're highlighting 4 bonus games: football, desert, hill climb, and stunt course. Football is described as footy on wheels, and they reckon it's a challenge just to hit the ball. Desert is a race through log fires, and sand dunes sounds a bit like a buggy game, but on bikes. Hill climb is about reaching the top of a mountain without falling off. Classic Excitebike physics there, I imagine. Then there's a stunt course in a stadium, although the reviewer doesn't seem too impressed, calling it a bit dull compared to Wave Race's stunt stuff. There's a pluses and minuses bit. On the plus side, sensuous controls, track design so polished it shines, packed full of brilliant extras, and splendid multiplayer fun. Bit flowery language there, even for a games mag. Minuses are a bit with a shrunken display, and not as quick as Ridge Racer and company. Shrunken display? Probably talking about split-screen multiplayer, making things a bit smaller on screen, which was always a pain. If you like this, section points to Wave Race 64, and calls it a glittering jewel of a racer. Bit dramatic, but Wave Race was good, fair play. Then they've got little sections scoring the game on different things. Visuals gets a 9, sounds an 8, mastery a 9, and lifespan another 9. Visuals are strikingly attractive courses and convincing motorbikes. Sounds are good, but the whine of the bikes begins to grate after a bit. Mastery is praised for using the full potential of the N64 controller, which is a fair point. The analog stick was something special at the time. Lifespan, they reckon it will last ages even without multiplayer. The verdict is, Sublime handling and dreamlike track design make Excitebike a truly glorious racer. Essential. Strong words. And it gets a 90% overall. So yeah, looks like they really rated Excitebike 64. Must have been a good one then, maybe I'll dig it out again sometime. This page is all about Taz Express on the N64, and it doesn't sound like they're pulling any punches in this magazine, are they? Apparently, in the previously in N64 section, they'd already previewed it in issue 41, and talked about Taz in the big house. Sounds like they weren't too impressed back then either, if they're already mentioning shame about blocky backgrounds, and saying Taz won't be sticking around in the big house for long. The main article is titled, Scenic Shame, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know. They're comparing it to Turok, saying Turok got away with fog because the gameplay was good, but Taz Express has terrible pop-up, backgrounds and fog, and apparently, gameplay that's not much better. They reckon the programming efforts are a bit rubbish judging by the look of the screenshots, and they're not wrong, they do look a bit rough, don't they? They mention this raspberry noise Taz makes from the Saturday morning cartoons, and it's been squelched into this platformer from Z2, who made playing Tetris and Z2's previous delights. They're saying Glover was better, and this is just repetitive crate-pushing levels. They go on about the level design being uninspired, even with beach, city, Wild West, and ghost town levels, plus puzzle sections. They say it's tedious and frustrating, lacking creativity and deeply unsatisfying, which isn't exactly selling it, is it? Apparently you're just moving crates and objects into holes, and the only brief respite from the tedium was from another Z2 game, whatever that was. They even reckon Taz, Marvin the Martian, and Yosemite Sam could be mistaken for celluloid counterparts, until you see them just jumping around like loons. They admit Taz's spinning move is fun for a couple of minutes and he smashes up the scenery, but you can't even see the scenery properly, because the camera is playing up, and won't show you what you're meant to be looking at. They're asking if you're meant to laugh, and they said they did, then they stopped. Ouch. There's also a fan TAZ/TIC bit, with tips for the first level, showing you how to leave the crate, go right, gobble nosh for speed, push blocks, grab crates, deposit them on safe squares, and smash scenery to reveal new bits. Basic platformer stuff really. Warrington. Finally, there's an INFO burst box that says Taz Express is from Infogrames, it's 96 megabit, it's one player, and uses the controller pack for saving. Cartridge save is ticked, password save is crossed, expansion and rumble and transfer pack sags are crossed out too. It was due out in June in the US and UK, and TBA in Japan, and cost £40. 40 quid! For that? They're having a laugh, aren't they? This page is a review of Taz Express on the N64. Blimey, 27%, that's a proper kicking. Seems like the reviewer wasn't too chuffed with this one. Under Taz number like, they're highlighting some of the annoyances, and it's not exactly painting a pretty picture. Looking at the pluses and minuses bit, the plus points are pretty thin on the ground. Warner Bros. Cartoon capers, spinning's fun, mercifully short levels, and that's your lot apparently. The minuses list is much longer. Camera issues, ropey graphics, annoying music, the usual suspects for a Duff game back then. They reckon even the license itself was the only thing that might shift copies. Ouch. If you like this section points you towards Glover, which is a bit of a stretch, isn't it? Glover was alright, a bit quirky, but decent enough. Comparing it to Taz Express might be a bit harsh on Glover, if this review is anything to go by. The individual scores for visuals and sounds aren't great either. Flat textures, lousy fog, tedious musical warblings, sounds like a right eyesore and earache. Mastery section is basically saying it's a waste of the N64's potential, and the lifespan bit isn't much better. Dull gameplay, even with the Warner Bros. Characters showing up. The verdict sums it up nicely: missed opportunity and third-rate platforming. Looking at the screenshots, it does look a bit basic, doesn't it? Shame, Taz could have been good on the N64. This page is from the Import Arena section, harking back to when we were all desperate for a bit of gaming goodness from overseas before it landed on our shores. It seems they're covering import games from Japan and America for the N64. Featured here is Zelda Majora's Mask, which was hotly anticipated back then, and rightly so looking at those screenshots. They've got a few little snippets about gameplay, like how Goron's domain is a sight for sore eyes once the ice melts, and some old hag can fast forward time, but she's a bit temperamental apparently. There's also mention of village celebrations, and the Deku King planning dinner with his monkey mate. Sounds typically Zelda-esque and bonkers if you ask me. Down in the info burst box, they've got all the tech specs laid out. 256 megabit cart, single player only, which is standard Zelda really. Controller pack hidden and password save are crossed, so looks like cartridge save only. Expansion pack ek is ticked, which is good. Rumble pack ek is also a yes. Transfer pack and controller pack are a no-go. And then the all-important release dates: Japan, right now, naturally, USA in October, and us Brits, we're made to wait until November. Typical. Cost is 6,800 yen, which translates to about £35. Not bad for an import. This page dives straight into a look at Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask, and blimey, back then we were all still buzzing from Ocarina of Time, weren't we? This is flagged as the second N64 Zelda game, and it's about ruddy time if you ask me. We'd been waiting ages. Royce. The review here talks about the game's time-based play, against the clock, which was a bit of a new concept for Zelda. 3 in-game days to stop the moon crashing down, or about half an hour in real time. Clever idea though, letting you rewind time. They mention you keep your items, thankfully, but the world keeps ticking on, so characters have their own routines, meaning you need to be in the right place at the right time. Sounds a bit stressful, but in a good way, you know? Warrington Nulkus. There's a bit about the language barrier too, as this is a review based on the Japanese version. They got through it okay, saying it's intuitive enough, but reckon understanding the Japanese text would make it even better. Smart move suggesting to wait for the UK release in December, if you could hold out that long. Rishareka. They've got a few screenshots dotted about. You can see that menacing moon face staring down at Clocktown, classic image that is. Link's getting some air in another shot, and there's Deku Link milling about in town. Oh, and check out the Happy Mask salesman. They say he was friendly enough in the first game, but now he's horrifyingly scary. Blimey, he does look a bit intense. And lastly, some underwater action with Zora Link facing off against some massive snake, described as long as a train. They even mention the expansion pack is in full effect for this, so they were really pushing the N64 to its limits. Jakai? Overall, it's that classic N64 Magazine hype for a big release, and rightly so. It was Zelda after all. They're definitely intrigued by Majora's Mask, and it's got that import arena tag reminding us that some of us were keen enough to get our hands on it early, even in Japanese. Good times, good times. This page is from an old issue of N64 Magazine. Must be from around the year 2000. Looking at it, blimey, time flies. It's a guide, or first steps as they've called it, for the start of Majora's Mask. Proper classic game that. A bit darker than Ocarina of Time, wasn't it? So part 1, the route to Hyrule 2, kicks off with Majora nicking your trusty steed Epona and your ocarina, cheeky sod. Then you're chasing him as Link, and bam, you're turned into a Deku scrub by that pesky mask. They mention some acrobatics, Link leaping about in mid-air, showing off those new moves. Then there's this surreal warp thing, bit psychedelic for Zelda. Even back then, apparently, Majora buggers off and leaves behind one of his fairies, Belle, taking over from Navi, remember her? Anyway, you end up in the clock tower and meet the mask salesman, remember him? Creepy fella. He wants Majora's Mask back, obviously, and that sets you off on your adventure into Clocktown. Part 2 is going to town. They're telling you to avoid the Deku residents. Bit rude that, calling them decaphobic, but hey ho. Grab a fairy from the river, take it to the North Fountain, and a great fairy pops out and gives you some magic. Then there's this bit with kids and a giant balloon. You gotta use your Deku Spit Charming to burst it, and then you play hide and seek with them. Apparently finding these kids reveals a number, a 5-digit number, which you need for some gate guard to get into a dungeon. Bit of a faff if you ask me. Next bit, you use a telescope, have a gander at Majora sitting on top of the clock tower, and apparently, he's going to send the moon crashing down. Cheerful stuff. A Deku shrub in town will help you get up the clock tower, using a rock as a platform. Bit clever that. Then inside the tower, you drop your ocarina. Classic Zelda flashback with Princess Zelda, all that emotional stuff. Finally you play the Song of Time, get warped back to day 1, the whole time loop thing, remember that was quite novel at the time, and the mask salesman takes off the Deku mask. And that's part 1 done apparently. Warring get worry. There's also a little box on the side about money. Because of the time loop in Majora's Mask, you lose your rupees when you go back to the first day. Bit of a pain. But they say there's a banker in Clocktown who'll look after your dosh, and there's a moneybird enemy. Right, good to know I suppose. Typical magazine walkthrough, gets you started, doesn't it? The next page dives straight into Majora's Mask, and it's dubbed Hyrule, the sequel, which is a bit cheeky considering it's Termina, not Hyrule, but whatever. This is the import arena section, so they were still getting their hands on the Japanese version at this point. It kicks off with Clock Tower Village, highlighting the scheduler and earning gifts from villagers, suggesting it's all about getting involved in their daily routines, which was a cool, unique aspect of Majora's Mask. Then it moves to Melon's farm and Ingo's ranch, talking about Epona and horse racing, classic Zelda stuff, nothing too groundbreaking. Donk, Deku Forest and Skulltula Hunt are next, pointing out the deadly swamp and golden spiders, both staples of Zelda gameplay. You know the drill by now. Zora Beach is mentioned with the Zora mask, and a psychedelic beaver race sounds like a typical bizarre Zelda side quest, doesn't it? Gerudo Fortress is back, reminding us of the stealth elements and stealing Zora eggs, a bit of a throwback to Ocarina of Time, but with a twist. Finally, Goron's domain is there, focusing on quieting the crying Goron baby, and a racer-style rolling Goron race. It's all a whirlwind tour of the early bits of Majora's Mask, basically setting the scene for the wacky adventure to come. They're really pushing the separate from Hyrule angle, which fair enough, it is a bit of a departure. This page covers the temples in Majora's Mask, proper meat and potatoes stuff for any Zelda game, and these dungeons don't disappoint. First up is the Forest Temple, described as a gentle introduction to Zelda temples, which is maybe a bit generous. They're always a bit of a head-scratcher to start with. Apparently, it's all about floating around with petal power, organic man-traps, and getting your hands on the fairy bow. The boss is described as a jabbering, spider-chucking voodoo giant, which sounds like a right laugh. Then we've got the Ice Temple, 6 stories high apparently, and difficulty ramps up when you're rolling around as Goron Link. Sounds like the usual ice dungeon fare, with melting ice barriers, and a bull-like boss. The reviewer reckons it's disappointingly easy, just a high-speed chase, which might be a bit of a letdown. Finally, there's the Water Temple, probably the one everyone dreads in Zelda games. This one sounds particularly annoying, with pipes, screws and ice arrows, and a piranha-like boss, making it the toughest dungeon. Sounds about right. Water temples are always a pain in the backside, aren't they, warrior? The page also talks about the masks, starting with the Deku mask. Apparently, as well as floating about, little Deku Link can fire mucus balls from his nose and do a spin attack. Lovely. The Goron mask is hailed as the greatest, not just for punching the ground hard, but because Goron Link can roll around like a loony at breathtaking speed. Brilliant, apparently. And lastly, the Zora mask, which is great for swimming, but they reckon Zora Link is a bit fiddly to control for doing anything useful like punching or throwing boomerangs. Sounds about right for trying to control Link underwater. This page dives into Majora's Mask, doesn't it? Seems they're highlighting some of the mask abilities, which is fair enough. That was a pretty big deal in this Zelda game. They're calling it mask attacks. Clever. First up is the rabbit mask, which they say you get from that nutter in Kakariko Village's windmill from Ocarina of Time, now living in Clocktown. Apparently he'll give it to you if you chat to him by the river on the second day. Makes you run faster apparently. Righto. Tie. Then there's the frog mask, looks like a frozen Goron. We'll cough this one up. If you give him some of that choo-choo jelly, you have to round up 5 frogs dotted around the game world, and they'll sing for you, showing their thanks. Bit odd, but alright. Lady Mask is next. Apparently a rich lady in Clocktown Hall gives you this. It impresses the Kuko girl in the hotel and she gives you a letter for the postbox. Fetch quests, eh? Standard Zelda stuff. Warrington next. Lastly, they're talking about the bomb mask. Get this at midnight on the first day, after some old dear gets her bag nicked by a thief. If you sort it out, you get the bomb mask. Lets you use bombs by pressing B. Handy when you're low on actual bombs, they say. Hey, there's a bit at the top saying Majora's Mask is Link's greatest adventure yet. Bit of a stretch, but each to their own. They reckon the cuddly enemies are gone in favor of icky insects. Yeah, there were some creepy crawlies in this one. Down the side, there's a so long farewell bit. They're on about how Zelda 64 2, as they call it, has changed things from Ocarina of Time. Loads of items are gone, like the tunics, hover boots, silver and gold gauntlets. But they say the mask powers sort of make up for it, letting you breathe underwater and lift heavy things, which those items used to do. Fair enough, I suppose. Masks are the big thing in this game after all. At the bottom, bonus tracks. They were expecting hidden songs in Ocarina of Time, which never happened apparently. But Majora's Mask has tunes that come from mucking about on the ocarina, or pipes, drums or guitar, depending on the mask you're wearing. And you can fiddle with the clock speed, speeding time up or slowing it down. They reckon that affects events in dungeons too. Interesting, never really thought about messing with the clock like that. They haven't found a song to take you back in time though, which is a bit of a tease, seeing as time travel is pretty key to this game. This page is diving into some of the familiar items you'll be using in Majora's Mask. First up is the hookshot, still a trusty tool from Gerudo Fortress for dragging yourself up walls, reaching hidden hearts, and getting to those pesky skulltulas. Then there's the bombs and bombchus, back again for blowing up rocks and uncovering secret caves where you can stock up on rupees and items handy for bosses apparently. And of course, arrows are back, with the fairy bow tweaked for Link's, shall we say, youthful hands. Fire, ice and light arrows are all present too. They mention wiping the smile off Majora's face, which sounds ominous. They also highlight the Goron mask, pointing out that while the Goron punch is slow, it's a knockout if it connects. Rolling around as Goron is apparently a blast too. Then there's the Zora mask, and they even call out the spiral eyes of the swimming beavers as nightmare fuel. Fair enough, they are a bit odd. There's a bit about the expansion pack, saying it bumps up the detail in the environments and facial expressions, and mostly adds to the monsters, making them bigger, prettier, and faster than the ones in Ocarina of Time. Sounds like they're gonna be a handful. Visually they're really impressed, talking about eye-popping set pieces, like chasms with invisible platforms, the Deku Temple rising from a lake, and the fast Goron races. They're also keen on how the environment changes, mentioning swampy Deku areas, frozen Goron regions, and melting ice revealing woodlands. In general they're saying Majora's Mask is very much like Ocarina of Time, just with different maps and dungeons. And considering Ocarina was pretty much the best game ever made, that's high praise. They think this is exactly what people have been wanting since finishing Ocarina of Time. They are really hyping it up, saying it's top-tier gaming, on par with Mario, Zelda, and Perfect Dark, which is setting the bar pretty high. Clocktown Village apparently feels more like home than Kokiri Forest, which is a nice touch. And finally, they reckon the dungeons are just as good as before, with even more monsters thanks to the expansion pack. So all in all, it sounds like they're pretty smitten with it. The next page in the mag is all about Majora's Mask, and it's getting the import arena treatment, which means it's a review of a game that was probably out in Japan and the US already, but we Brits were still waiting for it to arrive. Looking at the review, they're clearly proper chuffed with it. The End is the title of the main review section, and it talks about the darker tone and emotional impact of the game as the moon threatens to crash into Clocktown. Bit melodramatic maybe, but that's Majora's Mask for you, innit? They're going on about the clock tower chimes and the sense of loss. Alright, calm down, it's only a game. They've got plus and minus points laid out in classic magazine style. Pluses are flawless controls, camera and map design, which, yeah, Zelda games generally nail that. Masks open up new challenges, well, that's the gimmick of the game really. Dungeons are pure gaming pleasure, standard Zelda fare, and hours of subquests and side missions, which is always good for value for money. Minuses, they're scraping the barrel a bit here. Awkward camera angle, illogical puzzle or irritating glitch. Sounds like they had to dig deep to find something to complain about. Largely similar to its prequel is another minus. I mean, it's Zelda, it's gonna be similar to Zelda, isn't it? Bit of a daft criticism really. If you like this section recommends Ocarina of Time, unsurprisingly. It says, words simply cannot do justice to Ocarina. Bit strong. Accessibility section reckons you'll need help between dungeons, but otherwise Zelda is suitably intuitive. Visuals are praised as more detailed than Ocarina. Sounds get top marks for music and Dolby Surround. Mastery gets a 10, saying, Nintendo's superhuman powers in full effect. Bit much. Lifespan is a 9, shorter than its prequel, but still plenty to do. The verdict is a big yellow box screaming, 95%. It's Zelda, what more can we say? Another mind-blowing masterpiece from Nintendo. They're certainly laying it on thick, aren't they? Still, 95% is a stonking score. Mark Green is the reviewer, whoever he is. July 2000 at the bottom there, so right in the middle of the N64's life, just before the GameCube came along and blew it out of the water. Good times. This page is the cover for Club 64 in N64 Magazine right then. It's pitching itself as total game service for Nintendo 64 owners. Very official sounding. Club 64 inches is splashed across the top in big letters with some red balls and a cartoon globe chap playing an N64 controller. Bit cheesy, but it's aiming at kids, I suppose. Dear, the main feature this month is Pokemon Stadium, labeled as this month's top guide. Can't miss that big yellow Doduo creature and Pikachu on there, eh? It says 6 pages of tips to help you win every single poke battle. Unmissable. Bit strong, unmissable, but Pokemon Stadium was a big deal. Remember renting that for ages at Blockbusters with the transfer pack to get your Game Boy Pokemon in 3D. It had mini-games and tournaments, good fun. Many. Down the right side, we've got the usual Club 64 sections. Club 64 mailbox for comments, corrections, coins and Pikachu. Coins? Wonder what that's about. Page 74. How to trash the monsters at Pokemon Stadium. Page 78. Right on cue with the cover feature. Then how to take home the gold in Track and Field 2000. Page 84. Track and Field. Classic arcade stuff brought to the N64. Button bashing madness that was. Tips extra. For tasty tips and the latest action replay codes. Page 88. Action replay. Cheeky way to cheat, weren't they? Dr. Kit's Game Clinic for Resident Gaming GP answers your queries. Page 93. always had these advice columns, didn't they? Game on, with 8 tricky new challenges. Page 94. More bits to do in games keeps you busy. I'm the best, for latest scores and a new time to beat. Page 96. High scores, bragging rights, the usual. Millennium, our all-new skill club is starting to get busy. Page 100. Sounds like some kind of online thing maybe? Directory. Every N64 game ever made rated for you. Page 104. That's a bold claim. Every game ever. Always good to see what they thought of games though. And finally, back issues and subscriptions. Page 114. Get your old mags and sign up for more. Overall, classic magazine cover layout, highlighting the big game of the month and the regular sections. Pokemon Stadium taking center stage, as you'd expect. July 2000, yeah, that sounds about right for Pokemon Stadium hype. Good times. This page is the Club 64 mailbox section. Looks like readers have been sending in their thoughts and bits and bobs. Someone called Nelly has sent in some pictures, and there's mentions of the Carrington Institute, which is from Perfect Dark. The first letter, titled Freakishly Similar, is from Joe Ridley in Australia. He reckons a New Zealand coin looks a lot like Majora's Mask from Zelda, particularly the eyes and the tongue. He reckons the coin was around before the N64, which is true enough. Majora's Mask wasn't exactly day one for the console, was it? He's right actually, looking at the coin picture, it does have a bit of a Majora's Mask vibe. Spooky. Next up, World Peace. Michael Edgar from Tyne & Ware has been browsing the internet and stumbled on a Carrington Institute website. You know, from Perfect Dark. He says it looks like a proper site dedicated to justice and world peace, which is a laugh considering what goes on in Perfect Dark. Apparently there's an agents-only area, with info on missing CIA scientists and recovered Datadyne files. Bit keen this Michael, he's even found the username and password, SolarisPal32v21Z. He's suggesting people check it out. It does look like a mock-up website screenshot there, complete with dodgy early internet design. Then we've got very familiar from Tom Webskinner in Haywards Heath. His mum was looking through the yellow pages, remember those? And she spotted an advert for Aramay Enterprises. Turns out it's an N64 game shop, and the advert has the N64 Magazine logo and the phone number from the bottom of the magazine page. He thought it was familiar, and he was right. Well spotted indeed, Tom. Looks like a proper old school yellow pages advert for games. Mentions CD-ROM as well. Bit of everything there. Lastly in the letters is Dr. Tom. Someone was in France and saw a French magazine called N64 Magazine. Apparently it's got a game clinic, La Clinique du Dr. Tom, and in April 2000, issue 28, they only had 4 Team 64 feet members. Readers asking what's going on, have we gone international? Bit random that. Nique-toi. At the bottom is Correction Corner. Looks like they are responding to some points from previous issues. In N64 issue 41, they told readers to deploy orange grenades, and someone pointed out it should be depoly. Oops. Then in issue 41 again, I'm the best section, someone called Stuart Bowker is moaning about the Donkey Kong 64 Rambi bonus game scores, saying people on joint 12th have higher scores than those above them. Bit of a scoring mix-up it seems. And finally someone else is asking why they didn't mention the pink eye power-up in South Park Rally DGG. They reckon they said find every power-up in the Millennium Readers Awards. Ed from the mag is basically saying yeah, alright, we messed up. Humble pie indeed. This page is the letters page. Club 64 mailbox as they call it. Right at the top, some chap called Simon Mason from Bournemouth is asking if the magazine is international or a rip-off. Bit cheeky. Ed, who seems to be answering the letters, basically says yes mate, we're international now. Then there's a letter about Little Nelly, that autogyro from You Only Live Twice. Some bloke called Ian Tollerton apparently got it wrong in a previous letter, calling it a helicopter. This other reader, Julian Adam, is setting the record straight and points out it's an autogyro, and mentions it looks similar to the gyrocopter in Pilotwings on the N64. Ed even put in a picture of Julian's Little Nelly model, which is a nice touch. Remember Pilotwings? That was a launch title on the N64, pretty good for its time, showing off what the console could do graphically, even if the gameplay was a bit, well, floaty. Gay. Next up, someone's complaining about a picture in issue 41, page 110, in an article called Guns. They reckon a gun pictured looks like the Far Sight from Perfect Dark but was meant to be a GoldenEye RCP-90. This reader is quite insistent, saying it's obvious. Ed, surprisingly, admits they are right. It is the Far Sight from Perfect Dark and they went all the way to Rare to get a picture of it. Bit of a blunder there from the magazine, but fair play for admitting it. Perfect Dark and GoldenEye still the kings of N64 shooters back then and even now, arguably. Though getting the guns mixed up, amateur mistake really. Then we have a letter titled Chief Hare from Ryan Lynch in Scotland. He's noticed the Pika, a real animal, looks like Pikachu from Pokemon. Ed confirms that Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon, actually based Pikachu on the Pika. Interesting little factoid that. Pokemon was absolutely massive at this point, wasn't it? Everyone was going mad for it. There's a little box about Pikas explaining what they are, like a mini nature lesson. Apparently there are 14 species in the family Oshotonidae. Who knew? Lastly, there's a Dream On section, where readers pitch game ideas. Seb Law from Ilkley wants a James Bond compilation game called Legend of 007, with levels based on 19 films. He's suggesting levels based on films like The World Is Not Enough and The Spy Who Loved Me, with different gameplay types, third-person shooting, driving, skiing and even multiplayer with deathmatches and races. He's even thinking VR headsets, and downloading characters via the internet, pretty forward thinking for the year 2000. Ed seems to like the idea, saying top idea, and mentions the excitement around GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, and thinks different Legend of 007 levels and storylines could be engrossing. They're asking for more reader ideas to be sent in. So, a typical letters page really, readers pointing out mistakes, sharing game ideas, and general chit-chat about N64 games of the time. Fair enough. This page is the letters section, Mailbox Club. Always a good read to see what punters were moaning about or praising. Stephen Morgan from Somerset kicks things off asking if they are stupid or biased. Ed, the editor, replies, "Definitely stupid." Charming. Someone else is quoting French sayings about fish. Then there's Florian in Amsterdam who apparently cried when he saw the magazine Poor Bloke. David Brown in Leeds is worried about Mark Green joining Skill Club, and Ed agrees it's a bit sad. Mohsen Khan Hussein is bragging about his maxed 306 and N64 gaming sessions. Daniel Driver is wondering whether to burn or flog something. Pagan altar or a fiver? Classic. Ed says flog it for a fiver. Peter Frogley wants to know when we'll hear Fatboy Slim and Jennifer Lopez tunes in the mag, and Ed says, ooh, someday, soon. David Hart wants something passed to Shigsy, and Ed says, I put it in his pigeonhole. Gavin Lane from Worthing is complaining. Worthing is full of old people. Nicholas Soemimo in London is feeling yearning for the N64 mag offices, and Ed retorts, believe us, that's not how we feel on a Monday morning. Matthew Sexton wants Hyrule Lake action, and Ed signs off with, our sentiments entirely. Typical letter page banter really, some funny bits. Then there's a bit about a Pokemon type diagram. It's the one-stop diagram for working out which Pokemon beats which. Genius. It's a little wheel showing type advantages, you know, water beats fire and all that. Simple but effective for the young'uns just getting into Pokemon Red and Blue on their Game Boys. Next up, Little Gizmo. Seems like they're talking about some internet thingy for the N64, calling it a gizmo. Christopher Matz is saying it's better than the 64DD for internet, cheaper and with a keyboard. Ed's response is, N64 internet access yes, but not the full Monty. Apparently, it's a guarded internet, aimed at 7 to 14-year-olds, with restricted sites and email only to other users of this Sharkwire Online. They suggest waiting for Dolphin's internet, which of course we now know was the GameCube, so they were already hinting at the next general. Finally, so tell me this, Peter Frogley is back, asking about Eternal Darkness in the UK, and who the characters are in Resident Evil 0. Ed says Eternal Darkness is coming in November, and Resident Evil 0 has Rebecca Chambers and Billy Cohen, Rebecca being from the original Resident Evil, Billy's new. Someone called Jonathan Matthews wants to know about Harvest Moon 64, Mysterious Dungeon and Zelda UK release dates, and if the new Zelda will beat Ocarina of Time. Ed says Harvest Moon 64 should be in shops in November. Mysterious Dungeon Paradigm Harrier 2001 looked promising but got canned. Typical. For Zelda, turn to page 64 for Majora's Mask latest, so still waiting on that one. Jamie Mancini asks about more WWF games for the N64, and Ed says yes, the latest THQ wrestler is called WWF No Mercy and is due probably around December time. Francis B is asking about GoldenEye guns in Perfect Dark, specifically the silenced PP7 equivalent. Ed says you start most Perfect Dark missions with the Falcon, which has regular, silenced and scoped versions. So yeah, Falcon is your PP7 equivalent. Standard Q&A stuff for a games mag really, answering readers' questions and keeping us in the loop about release dates and game info. This page showcases the Dolphin Factory, which is all about what Nintendo's next console, the Dolphin, might look like. Seems like readers have sent in their own designs. One is a bit much, described as a circular console with fancy controllers, maybe a bit too out there for Nintendo, eh? Then there's another, the Nintendo 2000, by a bloke called Tom Ellis. He's gone for a retro look, like the SNES, which is a nice touch. It's got a 3DN logo, and even an infrared window so you could use it as a DVD remote. Clever thinking that. Paul Matthews from Northumberland sent in a design too, incorporating a DVD player, a screen you can see, and even a clear window to see the game inside, a bit like those old arcade machines maybe? Over on the board, it's all readers' artwork. Janet L's done a Pokemon picture with Mew and Mewtwo battling. They reckon it's poster-worthy. There's a cute Yoshi pic from Anna Brayhout from Guernsey, bright and cheerful they say. Catherine Lakely, who's 14 from Devon, drew a Princess Zelda lovely job. Sam Manwaring from Wiltshire sent in a Dragonair, and Thomas Hauer from Denmark's artwork asks, "Where's your mask?" A good mix of reader creations on this page. This page is all about how to, and I quote, "trash the masters at Pokemon Stadium, cheeky." It's an article basically saying that the N64's training ground is open to everyone, talking about how Pokemon Stadium is more than just an add-on to the Game Boy games. It mentions that you can finally see your little Pokemon in glorious color on the big screen, which back then was a big deal to be fair, and enjoy some simple minigames. Apparently the reviewers in issue 41 gave Pokemon Stadium a whopping 90%, saying it was a consistently thrilling battle game packed full of perfectly realized 3D Pokemon. This will run and run. They've got some screenshots, showing off Zapdos, Blastoise and a Jinx, and even a Flareon getting a bit of stick with a caption saying, "Flareon's a bad little boy, bit harsh, innit?" Page 78, issue 43. This page is all about getting your Pokemon team in top shape for gym battles, and those tricky stadium cups. Classic stuff for any Pokemon trainer back in the day. "I'm the gym leader," it shouts, laying out tips for conquering each gym in Pokemon Red, Blue and Yellow. Starting with Pewter Gym, Brock's ground types are mentioned, but the advice is to pack Electric, Fire and Psychic for a balanced team. Then onto Cerulean Gym, suggesting Electric types to handle Raichu and Water and Ground for the rest of Misty's crew. For Vermilion Gym and Lieutenant Surge, the tip is solid ground types using Dig and Water and Flying Pokemon for the first battle, plus some grass to deal with his surfing Pikachu. Cheeky that was. Celadon Gym and Erica's grass Pokemon are next. Water and Ice are recommended, and apparently Psychic types are good here too, just watch out for Bind, always a pain in the neck that move was. Future Gym with Koga is up, Psychic types for the coughing, and Bugs are surprisingly suggested for the Psychic trainers later on. Moving on to Saffron Gym and Sabrina, Bug types are key for Sabrina herself, but then Water for the second battle, Fire for Executor and Jinx, and Jolteon's good for Psychics, especially with Sleep. Speed is crucial they reckon, no surprise there. Cinnabar Island Gym, Blaine's Fiery Challenge, they're saying Psychic techniques work well, or Sleep, and Dig to avoid self-destruct. Finally, Viridian Gym with Giovanni. Water is supposedly susceptible to him, but his Labman trainers use status moves, so speed is important. Giovanni's Kabutops is Rock/Water, so Electric is a good bet apparently. Warrington no. Then there's advice for Pokemon Stadium Cups. Pika Cup Choice says rental Pokemon are decent, pointing out Lapras as Water/Ice and Starmie with Electric, Water and Psychic moves. For Petit Cup Choice, they warn about level 30 Coughing and Execute in the third battle, and suggest the starter Pokemon are good, along with Oddish, Sandshrew, Ghastly and Machop. Apparently Lass is a nuisance, so fast Pokemon are needed. Go good. Pokecup Choice mentions loads of Pokemon, 96 in total, and reckons Psychic Pokemon are meddlesome. For the Master Ball tier, they list Jolteon, Alakazam, Articunos and Moltres, Dragonite and Zapdos. Prime Cup Choice is all about level 100 Pokemon, suggesting hand-reared, Super Tank Pokemon are essential, and Mewtwo if you've got one. Finally, the Master Plan section advises that Pokemon trained from low levels in Red, Blue or Yellow will thrash rental Pokemon, making it worthwhile to train them up. They suggest using stat boosters like HP Up, and clever use of dual types and TMs. Speed is vital, and they hammer home the message to just attack, attack, attack. No trainer ever won by showing off, they say. Bit of a laugh that, very true though. Good solid advice if you were still battling through the original games or jumping into Stadium back in the day. This page is all about Pokemon Stadium 2, blimey, remember that one? They've got a guide here, for the Pika Cup and the Petit Cup, For the Pika Cup it starts with Battle 1, which is against a Bug Boy who mostly uses Poison and Ground Pokemon, so Ground is good, but keep a Flying type in reserve for those bugs. Battle 2 is Flying Pokemon, apparently, so Electric Pikachu will be sweet, and they've got Grass types, so Fire is handy. Battle 3, Pikachu, I choose you. Electric types to deal with water-based Pokemon. Battle 4, Drowsy might cause problems, so Waters are handy, and this burglar fella is apparently a pyromaniac, whatever that means for Pokemon battles. Battle 5, ground attacks are useful against Mr. Fix's electric types, but watch out for Porygon, apparently he's slippery. Battle 6 says mix it up for versatility, use your dual types, as the opponent will too. Battle 7, more water types, so get electric ready, and Meowth will appear, so pack ground. Finally, the final battle, high-level Pokemon are tricky, but electric is wise, and keep ice for Dragonair. Right, got all that? You're endued. Then there's the Petit Cup. Battle 1 is Bug Boy again, so make fire and flying types handy for bug/grass. Battle 2. Perversely, take electric and ground into combat, flyers and poison prevail mostly here. Battle 3, unfortunately it's a balanced team, but lean towards poison so ground will do, and water for Geodude. Battle 4, electric is good for sailors water types again, so take ground to take on the rest. Battle 5, a couple of bugs like Butterfree for your psychic problems, take water for comfort. Battle 6, a mix of types so water, rock and fire, to protect yourself. Battle 7, need rock types here, but be careful, if last brings out a water type, speed is essential for success. And the final battle, Pikachu should see you nicely, as will Lapras's. Water/ice combo, Handreared Pokemon, are invaluable. Blimey, that's a lot of Pokemon type matchups to remember, innit? Still, good info for anyone wanting to conquer those cups in Pokemon Stadium 2. This page is all about Pokemon Stadium on the N64, giving you the lowdown on how to trash the masters at Pokemon Stadium. Bit of a dramatic title, isn't it? It's breaking down the Poké Cup, and within that, different levels named after Pokeballs: Pokeball, Great Ball, Ultra Ball, and Master Ball. It's basically a strategy guide, suggesting Pokemon types and tactics for each battle within these cups. For the Pokeball level, they're saying watch out for Psychic and Rock types in the first battle, suggesting Raichu or Voltorb, for a water-based mug in Battle 4, which is a funny way of putting it, meaning use water-type moves I reckon. They mention Rock, Psychic and Electric types for later battles, meaning use Water Bowl. Moving on to Great Ball, they suggest speed is key for the first battle. They're talking about using Fire against Grass and Ground in Battle 2, and Psychic and Electric for Battle 3. There's mention of Starmie and Raichu being good for Sanshrew's team in Battle 6T. Ultra Ball tips start with countering fighting types with Psychic and Rock in Battle 1, then Fire and Ground for Battle 2, Electric and Water for Dugtrio in Battle 4, and combining Psychic, Rock/Ground, and Water in Battle 5. Lastly, Master Ball, they're saying Abra and Golem are good for Battle 1, and Ground and Fire for Battle 2, but be careful of Grass apparently. Electric and Water again are the trick in Battle 4, and to combine Psychic and Ground in Battle 5. The final battle in Master Ball, they reckon you'll need a decent Golem and Electrode, and that's that for trashing those masters. It's all pretty straightforward stuff if you played Pokemon Stadium back in the day, type matchups and all that. Good memories battling through Stadium, trying to unlock all the extras. This page is all about dominating the Prime Cup in Pokemon Stadium 2. Right then, they're breaking down strategies for each level: Pokeball, Great Ball, Ultra Ball and Master Ball. For the Pokeball level, they are suggesting packing Water and Flying types for the first battle, and Rock and Attack types for the second. Seems straightforward enough for the early rounds. They mention using Raichu and a Ground type for Battle 2 and Raichu and Lapras again for Battle 4. Then for Battle 5, Electric and Fire type seem to be the order, and in Battle 6, Electric and Bug with an Abra showing up apparently. For the final battle in Pokeball, they say you need a proper mix of types and use them all. Warrington Nook. Moving on to Great Ball, they kick off with Flying types, and then Ground and Rock for the second battle. Golem is mentioned for Battle 3, but with fighting moves. Battle 4 sounds tricky. They say Electric and Water types are good, and Battle 5 is more Electric and Fire. Battle 6 is Electric and Rock or Ground, and Battle 7 they recommend Electric and Fire again, and Charizard being handy. For the final Great Ball battle, they say you need at least 6 move types, which is getting a bit more serious. Drick and Rock. Ultra Ball is where they are saying to mix Electric, Bug and Rock/Ground right from Battle 1. Ground and Water are suggested for Battle 2 against Rocket's Poison and Rock types. For Battle 3, they are fighting types, so Poison is the way. And Battle 4 is Water, Rock and Electric. They suggest using Old Raichu, and a Fire type for Battle 5, and Electric and Ground for Battle 6 against Gengar. The final Ultra Ball battle is Electric, Ground and Water to clear things up. Hurry ye, hurry ye, hurry ye, hurry yow, hurry ye, hurry ye, jest you. Finally, Master Ball. They call the first trainer tricky and suggest Electric and Water. Battle 2 is Psychic, Water and Fire against Rocket, and Battle 3 is Psychic for fighting types. Battle 4 is Ice and Kadabra, and Raichu. Dual types, Electric, Grass and Fire are for Battle 5. For Battle 6, Watch out for flying types, and use electric types. Battle 7 they recommend Starmie's ice, water and psychic moves. And for the final Master Ball battle, it's Mew, a maxed out Onyx and Raichu to do the trick. Bit of everything there then for the Prime Cup. Good luck with that, eh? This page of Club 64 is all about the Kids Club section, taking a look at some of the minigames in Pokemon Stadium. Right then, let's have a butcher's at these. Dory. First up is Magikarp Splash. Looks like you're just button mashing to make your Magikarp jump higher than the others. Pretty simple stuff, even for a Magikarp I suppose. Yak. Next we've got Clefairy Says, which seems to be a Simon Says type game but with Clefairy dancing. Gotta remember the sequence. Classic reaction test really. Run Ratter. Run is your basic hurdle race with Ratter. Tap A to jump apparently. Don't get too carried away or you'll mess it up. Focus on the jumps it says. Words to live by in most games really. Snore War features Snorlax battling it out by snoring. Says something about rhythm and foot tapping. Sounds a bit daft, probably just button timing like loads of these minigames. Borington Nori. Thundering Dynamo is a Pikachu one. Seems you're shifting juice from one bulb to another. Gotta press the right button at the right time, or Pikachu gets zapped. Don't want to frazzle your Pikachu, do you? Ew. Warrington Nulsa. Then there's Sushi Go Round. This one's about remembering dishes and avoiding the wasabi. Memory game with sushi nice. Says it's profitable if you get it right, so maybe there's some in-game currency reward. Borington. Eakin's Hoop Curl is next. Looks like you're flicking Diglets through Eakin's hoops. Tiny stick flicks are the order of the day apparently. Gold Diglets for double points, naturally. Rock Harden is about smashing rocks, concentrating on shadows and knowing when they're coming. On hard difficulty, don't hold A between rocks, noted. Sounds like a reaction test again. Ooh. Poo. Finally. Dig! 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 Looks like you're just hammering the L and R buttons to dig. Middle and index fingers? Tap like crazy they say. Simple, yet fun. Well, simple certainly, yay gay. There's also a bit called E Extra Sweet, about unlocking a hyper mode in Who's the Best, by beating it 5 times on hard. Hyper hard difficulty they say. Great! Just what you wanted, more difficulty. Me talkie. And at the bottom there's a Get It In section asking for game ideas and quirky stuff. They want Pokemon teams for different stages and other tricks. Always asking for reader input. Magazines were back then. Pokemon Stadium minigames, good for a laugh with mates, weren't they? Not exactly groundbreaking gameplay, but a bit of harmless fun. The next page gives you the lowdown on how to conquer International Track and Field 2000 and bring home the gold in your virtual Olympics. It starts off by saying that most sports games try to look realistic, but this one, being a Konami game, is all about that classic button-bashing gameplay, really capturing that post-event exhaustion an athlete would feel. It's got a little section called Shine On that gives you cheat codes using city names to get shiny athletes. Proper bit of fun that was back then. You could enter cities like Athens for a silver athlete, Tokyo for bronze, Atlanta for gold, Sydney for platinum, and loads more colors like green with Mexico and yellow for Moscow. Apparently if you used these city names on the name entry screen you could unlock these shiny characters. Buko. There's also a What We Said box, reminding you they reviewed International Track and Field 2000 in issue 41, and gave it a solid 86%. They reckon it's basic and shallow but beautifully presented and superb fun, maybe a bit lacking for single player, but still worth a play. The page also has a few screenshots of the game in action, classic N64 graphics there, bringing back memories of hammering those buttons to get your athlete across the finish line. All written by a Mark Green. This page is all about mastering the controls for Track and Field 2000 on the N64. It's giving you the lowdown on the best techniques to absolutely rinse those button mashing events. First up it talks about using your thumbs, which is the most normal way, just hammering those C buttons with your thumbs, easy peasy. Then it moves on to using your forefingers, which is a bit fancier, resting the controller on your lap and using your index fingers to tap the buttons, apparently good if your middle finger cramps up, which, let's be honest, it probably would back in the day. Warrington Orcus. Next, there's the one-handed special, proper hardcore this one. Pinning the controller to a table and using 2 fingers from one hand sounds a bit desperate if you ask me, but they say it's effective and stops you pressing both buttons at once, which was a real danger when you were button bashing like crazy. The trigger section suggests using the shoulder buttons to help with button tapping, something to do with the controller design being better for left-handers apparently. Never really thought about that back then. Warranted. Then it gets into the stick and how to spin that analog stick like a lunatic for events like the hammer throw. It talks about the conventional way, which is just using your thumb, and then the unconventional way where you use your whole palm and even rotate the controller on the floor. Sounds like a recipe for controller damage to me, but hey, Gotta get those world records, right? Finally, the cheats section is a bit cheeky. It talks about using a pen to sweep across the buttons, which they admit is a bit naughty and probably frowned upon. Autofire controllers are mentioned, obviously proper cheating. Then there's the plaster trick for sweaty fingers and even wearing a glove to reduce friction. Pretty desperate measures to beat your mates at track and field. These were the lengths we'd go to back in the day to get ahead in multiplayer, weren't they? Good times. This page is diving into the events, which looks like a section dedicated to mastering various Olympic sports in some game. We're talking about 7 classic events here. The 100 meters dash, javelin throw, vaulting horse, long jump, trap shooting, 110 meters hurdles, and hammer throw. For each one, they've laid out the N64 best score, and then the medal targets gold, silver and bronze. And looking at these, they're not messing about, are they? Proper challenge to get gold, it seems. For the 100 meters dash, it's the usual button mashing chaos, but apparently there's a one-handed special if you're feeling fancy for extra speed. And a little tip about the go timing. Javelin throw sounds like a bit of a faff. You've got to get your throw in before you cross the line, wait for a Sidian camera view, and aim for a 45-degree angle. Good luck with that. Vaulting horse is described as an absolute nightmare. Stop button bashing when you lift off, concentrate on stick directions, and landing. Near impossible, they reckon, but a perfect score is compulsory, so no pressure then. Long jump is all about building up speed by banging the control pad, whatever that means, hitting Z just as the speed camera shows up, and a 30-degree angle for takeoff. Trap shooting to get gold, you can't miss a single trap. They mention a flicking method and timing it with the crosshairs, plus you can get bonus points for firing early. 110 meters hurdles needs a sprint start, tapping those C buttons, and adjusting your stride depending on how close you are to the next hurdle. Finally, hammer throw. They say to check the previous page for full details, but it involves turning the controller upside down and rotating it. Sounds a bit daft if you ask me. Get the power up, and hit Z when the ball is at 12 o'clock, aiming for 45 degrees again. So there you have it. A crash course in virtual Olympic glory. Getting gold in all of these looks like it would take some serious practice, mind. This page is a guide on how to bag yourself gold medals in summer games on the N64. Right then, let's see what they've got for us. For the horizontal bar, apparently the trick is to stop the pointer bang in the middle of the bar. Easier said than done when it's zooming all over the place, isn't it? They even dock you points for errors. Cheeky buggers. Weightlifting? Well, that's just a button bashing marathon, as always. Tap like mad to lift those heavy weights. Moving on to the swimming pool, they've got 100 meters freestyle and 100 meters breaststroke tips. For a good start in the breaststroke, you're supposed to press L or R around 5 seconds after ready appears. Sounds like a bit of a gamble if you ask me. And keep an eye out for speeding up too much in the box nets, whatever that means. For freestyle, it's all about hammering those buttons to avoid your fingers giving up. Thumbs are recommended apparently. Sensible advice, Warwickshire. Then we're on to the jumping events. High jump, triple jump, and pole vault. For the high jump, you need to hit the red section on the track and get the angle at 44 degrees apparently. Who's got time to measure angles in a game? Triple jump is similar, angle and power, and pole vault, well, it's all about the power meter and pressing Z at the right time just before the pointer hits the target. Good luck timing that, I say. Kawa? They've even listed the N64 best scores and the gold, silver and bronze medal scores for each event, so you know what you're aiming for if you want to be a virtual Olympian. Those bronze scores look pretty tame now, mind you. Still, back in 2000, this was probably gold dust for beating your mates at summer games. This page is all about cheat codes, proper handy things back in the day before the internet was in every pocket. We've got Tony Hawk skateboarding at the top, showing off a few screenshots of the skating action. Looks like they're giving away the secrets to unlock everything and mess around with the game, like a 10x trick multiplier, which sounds a bit mental, and slow motion for when you want to look extra stylish, or just figure out what you're doing wrong, or... Then down below, it's All-Star Baseball 2001. Never got massively into baseball myself, but it was a pretty big deal over in the States. This section is packed with cheat codes too, for daft things like making players fly back to the dugout, having tiny players, aluminium bats, big baseballs, and even blurred graphics. Why you'd want that, I'm not sure. Perhaps to make it look even more retro in a few years. They've got codes like FLY Our Way and TOMTHUMB. Classic cheat code names, really easy to remember, unlike some of those button combos for Tony Hawk's. Good stuff for anyone wanting to have a bit of a laugh with these games, and not take it all too seriously. This page is all about cheat codes and tips for a few games. First up, we have Jeremy McGrath Supercross 2000. It's got a list of tricks you can do by holding the R button and then pressing various other buttons like Z, A, and B with directional inputs. Things like NAC, NAC, no hands, can, all the usual motocross stuff. Remember Supercross? It was alright for a bit, but not exactly a classic. Then there's the new Tetris. They've got cheats to make the blocks fall faster, delete lines, and reset the wonders. And even a kaleidoscope mode. Tetris, you can't really go wrong with Tetris, can you? Even on the N64. Finally, there are some bits for Fighter's Destiny. Apparently you can turn Pierre into a werewolf, which sounds a bit daft. There's also something about changing colors, a secret move with Ushi the cow, and how to get different winning poses by pressing A or B. Fighter's Destiny was a bit of a weird one, trying to be different with its ring-out system, wasn't it? Not exactly Street Fighter, but had its fans, I suppose. This page is all about readers' top tips, you know, those little nuggets of wisdom to help you get the most out of your N64 games. It's from Club 64 Tips Extra, which was always a good section in N64 Magazine. Right at the top, tip of the month goes to someone called Chris Shooter from Loughborough for a Mario Party tip. Apparently, if you buy up most of the items in the mushroom shop, a gameball machine appears, where you can get minigames like Slot Car Derby cheap as chips. Good one if you're a minigame fiend. Possire. Tip 2 is for World Driver Championship. This bloke David Everson reckons getting all gold cups in GT2 is hard, but getting them in GT1 cars is much easier. Obvious, eh? Bit cheeky to call that a top tip, really? Donkey Kong 64 gets a mention next. Tip number 3. On the multiplayer Arena 1 level, some of the walls are fake, just like in GoldenEye's complex level, to shake off pursuers. Peter Frogley from Harlow figured that out. Tekora. Jet Force Gemini tip next. Number 4. Shurikens are rare, apparently, and if one gets stuck in a wall or ceiling, shoot it with your pistol, and it'll fall down. Haytham Magdi from London shared that. War in Tekist. Tip 5. Back to World Driver Championship. To acquire the Mystic car, you need to get rank 1, complete GT2, then go back to Novice Cup, but don't bother qualifying. Then you race against the Mystic, which is as good as the Mystic on Hawaii A and Kyoto A in mirror mode. No name on that tip, bit mysterious. Corin 2, GoldenEye 007, tip number 6. Get all guns and head for the dam level. Blow up the gate with the padlock, open the gate, and the destroyed padlock remains suspended eerily in the air. Matthew Potter from Swindon noticed that. Bit of an odd one, not exactly game-changing, is it? Dragay. Tip 7 is for Rocket, robot on wheels. Gravity getting you down? Heavy man, what a drag. Type in a code using the D-pad while paused. Z, R, R, Z, R. Down, R, R, R. Right, R. Mark Davison from Email sent that in. Sounds like a gravity cheat, probably makes things a bit easier. Re. Another GoldenEye 007 tip at number 8. Go to the runway level with all weapons. Go through the big door, and stand on the walkway. Use the sniper rifle's zoom, fix your sights on an enemy, then extend the zoom with top C. Nick Wright from Tunbridge Wells found out you can waggle the sight up and down and make the little chappie fly. Bonkers. Donkey Kong 64 again, tip number 9. For GoldenEye Oddjob fans, if your foe chooses Chunky, you choose Diddy. When battle commences and he starts firing on you, run up close and his shots will pass harmlessly overhead. Richard Tatnall from Hampshire with that gem. Tony Hawk Skateboarding tip number 10. Select the Toaster himself and press right C to do some signature moves, including the kickflip McTwist. Erleno Rinning Hansen from Oslo with that one. Tony Hawk's was massive then, everyone was trying to nail those tricks. He banned them warranty. Diddy Kong Racing tip at number 11. On Crescent Island, instead of driving up the ramp into the ship, go around the side of the wall and throw a grenade. It bounces back and kills him, allowing you a free run around the level. Chris Wheeler from Cruise shared that. Road Rash 64 tip 12. If you get a 2x power and have a chain, you can knock another rider off his or her bike in one shot. Handy if you're in a scrap with the cops. Chris Burns from Enniskillen knows his stuff. Faku. GoldenEye 007 makes another appearance at tip 13. On cradle level, run quickly to the middle and go down the steps. Stand pressed against the wall on the left, in the corner where there's no door. Trevelyan sees you sticking through the other side of the wall and throws a grenade. Jeremy Drabble from Hampshire found this oddity. Tony Hawk Skateboarding again, tip 14. In Chicago, get some bodacious air out of the large quarterpipe connected to the halfpipe. If you rack up enough speed, and hold top C, you'll grind a huge overhead rail. Another tip from Jeremy Drabble, Hampshire. Lad is a tip machine. Warrington Nook. Finally, tip 15. Flying Dragon. To make easy mode even easier, highlight easy then repeatedly tap left until very easy is displayed as an option. Laura Davison from Southampton with that super easy mode sheet. Key to ye. At the bottom, there's a section to send in your own tips to Tips Extra at N64 Magazine, 30 Monmouth Street, Bath. And if your tip gets used, you get a Mako pad and an N64 pin badge. Not bad for a bit of gaming know-how. Good times flipping through these pages, trying out the tips, weren't they? This page is from Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, a regular feature back in the day. It's a bit of an agony aunt setup, but for N64 gamers struggling with their favorite titles. We've got a question about getting fire out of the side of a pod racer in Episode 1, Racer. Dr. Kitts, in his usual dismissive manner, basically tells the poor chap Alex from Burnley that only Sebulba can do that, and to get Sebulba's pod you need to complete the Boonta Eve Classic Championship race. Fair enough advice, if a bit blunt. Next up, Rosie from Amersham is having trouble finding the key for Smoky Castle in Diddy Kong Racing. Dr. Kitts, twirling a buttercup no less, tells her to collect 3 blue balloons in Boulder Canyon to make a super boost, then use it to get the key. Classic Diddy Kong Racing puzzle solving, wasn't it? Those balloon challenges could be a right pain sometimes, but satisfying when you figured them out. Jerkow. Then there's Andrew from Lanx asking about catching the eel thing in Zelda. Dr. Kitts goes all dramatic, staring deep into his very soul apparently. He explains you need to fish at night or vice versa. Use the sinking lure, cast near its mouth with iron boots and Zora tunic. Sounds like he's talking about the Hyrule Loach in Ocarina of Time, that slippery blighter. Remember spending ages trying to catch that thing? Good times. Lekker. Finally, Anthony from Bedfordshire is stuck on how to play as the panda in 1080 Degrees Snowboarding. Dr. Kitts, seemingly distracted by a mountain biking magazine, reveals the convoluted method to unlock the panda. You need to beat every top score in time attack, trick attack, and contest mode, beat the panda on expert in match race, then select Rob Haywood, and hold right C and press A. Blimey, that's a lot of effort just to play as a panda. Those hidden characters were never straightforward, were they? The page finishes with a cut-out form for sending in your own gaming queries to Dr. Kitts at N64 Magazine, Bath. Ah, the days before online forums and instant answers, you had to actually write in and wait for the next issue. Simple times. This page showcases 8 challenges to really test your N64 skills, under the banner, Game On. It starts off mentioning if you are feeling complacent after breezing through Donkey Kong 64 or Resident Evil 2 and need something to spice things up. They're basically saying, life's a challenge, get on with it. Very motivational, I must say, many. The first challenge is for Super Smash Bros, called Piranha Push. Apparently, Joe Gallagher from Wirral is a Jigglypuff and Captain Falcon expert. Showing off already. The challenge is to play on Mushroom Kingdom for 3 minutes in multiplayer free-for-all, and knock out piranha plants from the pipes. Medals are awarded based on how many you manage to wallop: 15 for gold, 10 for silver, and 5 for bronze. Simple enough, bit of frantic fun. Next up is Donkey Kong 64 with Beaver Bash. Alan Gregory from Shrewsbury fancies himself a bit of a Biggles, eh? This one's a flying challenge in Fungi Forest Island using Diddy and the Diddy Barrel. You need to use Rocket Barrel Boost and fly around DK Isles, shooting beavers and zingers. Beavers are worth 2 points and zingers are 1. The challenge ends when you hit the ground or run out of ammo. No homing ammo allowed, mind. Medals are given for points scored, with 45 for gold, 40 for silver and 30 for bronze. Sounds a bit fiddly, but could be a laugh. Then we have Jet Force Gemini with Covert Operation. Stephen Faraday, Master of Sneakiness they're calling him. This one is about stealth in the first level. You have to get through the whole level without being spotted. It mentions the first sniper in the forest path, so you know where to be extra careful. You also have to kill all the drones without using homing missiles or shurikens. Medals awarded for distance covered without being seen, exit, first village hut, and village entrance are the checkpoints for medals. Sounds like a proper test of patience, not just blasting everything to bits. Finally, GoldenEye 007 has Mine's a Pint. Danny Harper from Cumbria is apparently a hardened addict of GoldenEye. This challenge is all about killing head honchos in 3 levels. Trevelyan in the Statue Park, Alec Trevelyan in the Aztec Complex, and Baron Samedi in the Egyptian Temple. You have to use 007 mode, set enemy health to 1000%, enemy damage to 900%, and reaction speed to 90%. Nasty stuff. Medals are awarded based on how many head honchos you can take down, with honchos offed as the medal titles. 3, 2, and 1 for gold, silver and bronze. Sounds like properly difficult GoldenEye, for the serious players not just messing about in complex. This page showcases the Club 64 8 challenges to test the best, feature from N64 Magazine. We've got a few game challenges here, aimed at seasoned players looking for a bit of extra spice. New. First up is WWF WrestleMania 2000, one of many. This challenge, dreamt up by a Josh Barrett, is all about endurance. You have to win a Royal Rumble with just one wrestler and defeat a whopping 40 superstars. Sounds like a proper test of your wrestling skills, alright? They've even got medal levels, easy, normal, hard and lovely, for completing it on different difficulty settings. Then there's Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time with the weakest link. Kevin Stokes from the West Midlands cooked this one up. The challenge is to complete the game with as few game overs as possible, and not pick up any heart containers, power-ups, items, or even the 100 gold sculptures. Sounds like a right devilish challenge, even for seasoned Zelda players who know every nook and cranny of Hyrule. The medal targets are set at 0, 3 and 5 game overs for gold, silver and bronze respectively. Mario 64 gets a look in with Into the Cannon's Mouth. James West from Bedford set this speed challenge in Bobomb Battlefield. You have to race around, visiting cannons in a specific order, and blasting to the top of the mountain and hitting the clock. They've got times for gold at 1 minute 1 second, silver at 1 minute 5 seconds 50, and bronze at 1 minute 10 seconds. Bobomb Battlefield, eh? Classic level, and a decent test of your cannon skills. Vitaya. Finally, we have Win Back with Win It Back. This is a level completion challenge. You have to finish all 31 levels of Win Back on trial mode. It's supposed to be about fast level completion times, and mastering each level individually. Graham Carmichael reckons 2 hours 30 minutes for gold, 3 hours for silver, and 3 hours 30 minutes for bronze are the times to beat. Win Back, a bit of an underappreciated third-person shooter if you ask me, but good to see it getting some love. At the bottom, it's your turn, calling for readers to send in their own game challenges. Around 100 words with 3 medal levels. They are particularly interested in challenges for Armoridines, Win Back, Jet Force Gemini, and Donkey Kong 64. If your challenge is good enough, you'll get printed in the magazine and a flashy N64 pin badge. Not a bad incentive for those creative gamers out there. Send your challenges to Game On, N64 Magazine, 30 Monmouth Street, Bath, BA12BW. Right proper address for a gaming mag. This page kicks off with a big bold title, Go Gadget Go! And it's all about the gadgets in Nintendo games, proper futuristic stuff. They're asking, who is David Batchelor? And it turns out he's a NASA scientist, some kind of astrophysicist bod, which is quite fancy for a games mag, isn't it? They've got a picture of his NASA security pass. Looks official enough. He's apparently there to give his expert opinion on whether the gizmos in N64 games are actually plausible in real life. The article talks about how important gadgets are in games like Perfect Dark, James Bond, and Turok. Imagine those games without all the cool tech, they just wouldn't be the same, would they? Joanna Dark with no watch laser, Bond without his gadgets, Turok with no city-destroying weaponry? Madness. There's a picture of Joanna Dark's watch from Perfect Dark, the one with the laser in it, remember that? And then down below there's a screenshot from what looks like Luigi's mansion, with the health percentage and a little caption boxes talking about lightsabers, be they fact or fiction, and Joe's X-ray scanner. So it seems like they're using David Batchelor's NASA brain to see if things like X-ray scanners and lightsabers could actually be real. Written by Mark Green, it says at the bottom, so he's the one getting the science lesson, not us. Page 116, issue 43 of N64 Magazine, for anyone keeping track. So yeah, gadgets in Nintendo games, and a NASA scientist giving his verdict. A bit of a laugh really, but good fun. This page from Go Gadget Go in N64 Magazine is having a look at gadgets from various games and whether they would work in the real world. First up are watch magnets from GoldenEye 007. It's that wrist-mounted magnet Bond uses, to grab keys and metallic bits and bobs. David reckons it's too fussy as it would attract any old iron, but admits real versions are used for scrapyards, just not quite as Bond-like, and you'd need a power supply. ETA is never. Harsakal. How? Next, laser pistols from Jet Force Gemini. These are Vela's pistols that spit out lasers, great for ants in the game. Ammo in capsules, naturally. NASA apparently thinks they are a possibility. David says laser beams are possible, but power would be the issue. You'd need a huge battery. ETA is 2050. Then we've got floating boots from The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Link's hover boots. Lets you walk off platforms and float for a bit. ETA is never again. David is quite sarcastic about this one. Roadrunner cartoon levels of science, but suggests if Link's boots were made of cold superconducting metal, and Hyrule itself was magnetically charged maybe. Number 4 is combat spaceships from Lilac Wars. That's Star Fox 64 to some of us. Fox McCloud's ship's doing all those fancy aerobatics in space. ETA 2030. David says there's room for improvement in aircraft, but the fragility of humans is the issue. All that jerking around in the cockpit. Furry pilots probably aren't getting tougher either. E.T. Lastly, magnetic racers from F-Zero-X. Those futuristic magnetic cars on Big Blue Track, sticking to the track at mad speeds. ETA 2015. David reckons magnetic levitation is possible. It's all about the right materials and sensors. But drivers might pass out with the blood rushing to their head going upside down on Big Blue. The next page in this N64 mag is all about Go Gadget Go, looking at some rather fanciful weapons and gadgets from games, and seeing if they could actually happen. Bit of fun. First up is the tractor beam from Rocket Robot on Wheels, a game I remember being quite charming, but the reviewer David reckons tractor beams are pure fantasy. Magnets and light pressure are too weak apparently. ETA? Never, naturally. Bin. Then it's beam swords from Super Smash Bros., basically lightsabers. David thinks plasma swords are a possibility in the future, maybe 2030, though he does have a laugh at Mario wielding one, and makes a cheeky George Lucas comment. Next, the Shockwave from Turok, Dinosaur Hunter. Remember that game being a bit bonkers with its weapons? And this one is a nuclear explosion in your pocket. David says it's pure pyrotechnics and doesn't believe in the science, but tactical nukes are a thing, sadly, even shoulder-launched ones. ETA. Never. Railguns from Quake 2 are next. Quake 2 was a proper blast back then. David reckons railguns are doable by 2040, mentioning capacitors and lasers. He calls the spirals around the beam just for show, a bit of game flair, in it. Dake. Finally, homing missiles from Worms Armageddon. Worms was always a laugh with mates. David says heat-seeking missiles are already here, and the computers in them are doing a good job. He thinks bloody gunfights between worms are unlikely though, which is probably fair enough. ETA. Now, so a fun page looking at some game weapons, bit of a laugh, and some nerdy science talk. Good stuff. This page delves into some fantastical gadgets from the world of video games. Classic N64 stuff mostly. Warrington Norsa. First up, we've got pod racers from Star Wars Episode 1, Racer. What it does, says strap yourself in and zoom around any planet at ridiculous speeds. The ETA is a hefty 2075, and David reckons these electromagnetic oscillation-powered machines are pure danger. He thinks some crazy bloke might try it in the next century, but survival odds are slim. Bit dramatic, Dave. ETA. Next, teleporters from Donkey Kong 64. Now this is fun in the game, zipping around. What it does is teleport the Kong family instantly, ignoring a giant banana skin along the way. ETA? Never, apparently. David is having none of it, saying teleporting anything bigger than an atom is impossible, and we're not about to disintegrate and rebuild ourselves. He even jokes about switching hands with feet. Bit of a laugh. War. Then we've got X-ray scanners from Perfect Dark. These let you see through walls and spot hidden guards, according to the what it does. ETA is 2035. David wonders why you can't see the guard's trousers though, cheeky. He says you'd need to be bathed in some bright light for these to work, and even then it's a bit far-fetched outside of the world of Perfect Dark. Drone guns from Turok, Rage Wars are next. Throw it, and it sits there until an enemy walks by, then opens fire. What it does, in a nutshell. ETA is 2110. David thinks a microcomputer could make this work, but target identification and avoiding mines would be tricky. He even jokes R2-D2 would have been a lot more dangerous with one of these. Joh. Finally, hoverbikes from Forsaken. These float and jet around, ignoring gravity. What it does is pretty self-explanatory. ETA, also 2110. David reckons you'd need a top pilot, or a 22ND Century computer to control one, and anti-gravity is a long way off, unless we've got physics all wrong. He throws in a line about jet fuel being cheap in the 22nd century as well. Always good for a laugh, Dave. So, overall, a fun page looking at some wishful thinking from our favourite N64 games, with a bit of realistic grounding from David. Good stuff. This page is the cover of N64 Magazine. Looks like issue 43. Blimey, Banjo-Tooie, eh? Talk about a game we were all desperate for back then. They're calling it unmissable. And rightly so. The first Banjo-Kazooie was absolutely brilliant, so a sequel was always going to be huge. It says Rare's sequel to their Bear and Bird blockbuster is almost done, and they're going to reveal more features and new screenshots. It's got a big picture of Banjo and Kazooie taking up most of the page, looking as charmingly daft as ever. Down at the bottom it mentions reviews for a few games. Blues Brothers 2000, F1 Racing Championship and Hercules, The Legendary Journeys. Right, Blues Brothers 2000, not exactly a system seller, was it? F1 Racing Championship, yeah, probably decent enough for the racers amongst us. Hercules game? Could have been alright, I suppose, but Banjo-Tooie is the star of the show here, no doubt about it. It also boasts about being the UK's best-selling independent N64 mag. Fair enough. Good times. This page right then, it's issue 44 of Planet 64. Looks like they're proper chuffed about Perfect Dark this month, banging on about Tipped, Perfect Dark, and some tips extravaganza. Bet that's going to be pages and pages of stuff we probably already worked out, but hey, gotta fill the pages, haven't you? They're also shouting about Skill Club Millennium, which sounds a bit naff, probably some leaderboard nonsense. Tons of new tips and cheats. Well, that's what we're here for, isn't it? Then, the best special investigations. Always makes you wonder what secrets they've dug up. Probably something about a hidden character in Mario Golf, or something equally earth-shattering. Latest Dolphin news. Still going on about the GameCube, are they? Always teasing us with that, aren't they? And of course, the only reviews you can trust. Bit cheeky that, isn't it? Plus they're pushing the great N64 Perfect Dark challenge book, because you can't get enough Perfect Dark apparently. Looking at the games they're showing off this month, there's GoldenEye's slightly less cool cousin The World Is Not Enough, the Bond game. Then Turok 3, Dinosaurs and Guns Again, same old same old. Conker's Bad Fur Day. Now that's a bit of a laugh, sweary squirrel. Who'd have thought it on the N64? Then Battle for Naboo, more Star Wars Episode 1 stuff. Can't get away from it, can you? Indiana Jones, another one. Probably a bit clunky compared to the films, let's be honest. And finally, Mario Tennis, because you can't have a Nintendo mag without Mario somewhere. And a whole lot more besides, they say, probably filler. It's on sale Friday 7th of July, so that's coming up soon. And next month in Game Boy, they're reviewing Cannon Fodder and Poochie Karat, never heard of them to be honest. And tipping Pokemon Yellow and Wario Land 3, safe bets those. July 2000, issue 121 of the whole shebang apparently. There you go.